IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Vince Adair. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are back to talk some Notre Dame football. And Vince, there's obviously a lot going on in the college football world. You got a national championship game coming up here in less than a week. You've got every day, it seems, some big-time players entering, or at least some former big-time recruit is entering the transfer portal.
Yeah, no kidding.
Notre Dame is expected to have a big-time transfer on campus this week, which we reported on Irish Breakdown, I think, Monday. So a lot going on, but we're also going to kind of start taking a dive into the current state of the program and then projecting forward a little bit. I put the 2023 schedule kind of first glance on the site today.
I didn't get a chance to read it, but I'm excited.
We will talk about that next week. We'll have a show kind of looking at the schedule. It's going to be challenging. I mean, the combined record of this year's schedule is even better than what last year's was. And maybe the top three teams aren't as good next year. Maybe that's debatable, but the depth of the schedule is really the challenge. We'll see Notre Dame play their first FCS team. So a lot to get into. We'll break down who's leaving, who's staying, who's coming and going, all that type of stuff. We'll do position previews. But the first thing that I really want to look at, Vince, as we kind of dive into the 2023 season is just sort of a look at Marcus Freeman and what we learned and what we still need to learn about him. This was originally going to be two shows, but because we had to miss yesterday's show, we're going to kind of put them into one. And I think it's going to flow better that way too, Vince. It's just kind of put them together. And so what we're first going to do is we're going to look at the things that we learned about Marcus Freeman this year. And what we mean by learned is we're trying to look at it from the standpoint of what can we confidently say that we feel Marcus Freeman showed his football team is going to be about this year. Not what he said, but what he's done.
Right.
Because I think that's important because, Brian Kelly said things all the time and it never came to fruition. And a lot of football coaches are like that. I probably shouldn't use Brian Kelly because it's just going to seem like a shot. I'm just making a point that a lot of times coaches are going to say certain things. Oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, but then it doesn't manifest on Saturdays. And I think that's a big part of evaluating a coach is what do we see?
Yeah.
And what did we learn about this team? And then the second half of the show, we'll get into the areas where we need to see growth. Some of the growth is things we saw that we didn't like. And some of it is no matter what happened this year, these are going to be question marks. And these are going to be things that you have to learn, when we'll get into that. So those are going to be the two things that we discuss today. And, of course, we'll do a mailbag. So if you have mailbag questions, just put those in the chat. I'll tell you all this. Some of y'all have been putting like mailbag or MB at the beginning of a question, and it's really helpful for us to find those. It really is. So if you guys want to continue to do that, it just makes it easier to decipher between what is just a comment in the chat, you guys talking to each other, and then something that specifically you want us to address in the show. So we'll get into the mailbag at the end. Let's dive into when you kind of evaluate the last year plus and you're looking at what we've learned about Marcus Freeman and a Marcus Freeman coach team, Vince. And we're going to talk about the things that we believe from what we saw this year, from how they prepare, from how they practice. And then what we saw on Saturday is always the main thing because it's don't care what you do in the week of practice. It's what are you getting to show up on Saturday? We're going to talk about some of the things that we learned about Marcus Freeman this year. Most of it's like the things we learned that we like that can be the foundation of the program. And some of the things that we saw, can he fix this? That's going to be one of the question marks. And so to me, I think when I look at this football team, Vince, I think the first thing that we learned about this Marcus Freeman football team is this is a group that's going to respond very well to adversity. And now you want to get to the point where you don't have as much adversity from a winning and losing standpoint, but it's not just winning and losing. That's part of it, and we'll get into that. But it's dealing with captains being injured, like losing Avery Davis, losing Jarrett Patterson for a time. It's dealing with your starting quarterback going down. There's different aspects to, some locker room strife that had happened at some point in times this season, Vince. I think those are all things you look at and say, boy, there was a lot that kind of went on this year that this team had to show that they could overcome.
Sure.
And I think that they did. And I think that's the first thing we learned about it. And it starts with the injuries and overcoming injuries. But Vince, for me, it really comes down to what you see on Saturdays. This is a team that lost to Ohio State in a heartbreaker and then went out and just had a devastating loss the next week to Marshall. Rallied back from that, won 3 straight games, blowout win over North Carolina. Then you feel like you've got the season turned around, and you lose to Stanford.
Yeah.
And then, then you kind of come out, you go to USC, and you lose that game. Your quarterback transfers out, Isaiah Foskey opts out, Michael Mayer opts out, Cam Hart's injured, and all these different type of things. And this team comes out in a bowl game and wins. So I think that's one thing we learned about this football team, Vince, is they handle adversity quite well.
Yeah. Well, and there were so many different degrees of adversity, right? That we got to witness throughout the season. You mentioned injuries, right? Avery Davis goes out preseason, and was it Monday's show? We talked about what Avery Davis could have been to this team throughout the year. And it's like, that's a major injury.
Just from a leadership standpoint.
From a leadership standpoint, right? From an on the field standpoint. I mean, all of it. That's huge adversity, right? So much so that they're like, we're going to take a defensive player and put him on offense. They were
right, because why, Vince? You were already thin. You already had numbers issues.
Absolutely.
Joe Wilkins gets hurt at receiver in the offseason.
Yep.
Right? It's another one.
Yes. So, they were kind of grasping at straws at that point. And Xavier Watts did he even play a down of offense? I don't think he ever played a down of offense, right? So they overcame that with the guys that were in the room.
Sadly.
Which I know, I agree with you. But he's now locked himself in as a starting safety at Notre Dame too. So, I'll take that. But so you talk about injury adversity, then you talk about wins and losses. We talked about it going into the season. There's going to be peaks and valleys for this season from a win-loss standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint. I didn't think the valleys were going to be as low as they were. But I will also say that I didn't think the peaks were going to be quite as high as they were at times, right? When Tyler Buckner goes down in game 2 and you tell me that Notre Dame's going to absolutely dominate Clemson, that's a high peak for me. You know what I mean?
Throwing for under 100 yards.
85 yards of passing. Right. So, that's a peak. So it's like there were severe peaks and valleys in this season. And it's very difficult as a coach, as a head coach, as a coaching staff to keep your team, period, to keep your team when you've got the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And he was able to do that. That's saying something. And to everybody that I've ever heard interviewed, and I know that there was some adversity in the locker room at times during this season. I know that for a fact, right? But every kid that I've heard interviewed, when they get asked about Marcus Freeman, it's not the same kind of answer as in previous coaches. Like there's a love for Marcus Freeman. There is a respect for Marcus Freeman on this team. And obviously you saw that when they were trying to get him hired and all of that, but it's different once he gets the role, once he gets the job, and it wasn't all smooth sailing. So being able to keep his team on at least somewhat of an even keel and then to finish the way that they did, I think that tells me a lot about his relationship with the players, his relationship with the coaches, and his ability as a first-year head coach to be able to keep things moving in the right direction. Because that is, like I said, the valleys are pretty stinking low at times. He started his career 0-3, right? And I know, but that third loss was devastating. It's a devastating third loss. And then
I have a hard time with the 0-3, though.
I get it.
Anytime a coach takes over a team for a bowl game, it's not his team. It's not his staff. It's not. I
get it. Yeah. But if he would have won that game, it would have counted toward his win.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be talking about it.
People would have, though. Right, I'm not talking about you. I'm saying people in general.
Well, this is our show, though. I don't care what people.
But it's all about perception too, and there's perception that's outside of us.
Sure, because everybody else reported 0-3. You're correct.
Right, and that's my point. Because I completely agree with you. That was not his. He literally would have not.
I get what you're saying. Now. You're talking about the adversity in which people were discussing this team and all that. I get you.
He would not have coached that Fiesta Bowl the same way he did
Well, we
if
saw
that
that,
was his team. Like,
right?
there's
We
just
saw that in the bowl game,
there's
right?
no way.
With him taking more control of the defense in
Yeah.
the second half and other things. Correct. I
There's
get your
no
point
way.
now. Yes,
Yeah.
we're good.
Okay.
Please continue.
No,
This is why I mute myself. So sometimes I just stop myself from interrupting you.
It's fair. So, but anyway, I saw a lot of growth, and I think we're going to get to that as kind of a separate point. But the fact that he was able to keep this team and not lose them throughout the season, because remember, the vast majority of these kids were recruited by the last coaching staff, the last regime, right? And to be able to hold on to these kids, not physically like transfers and stuff like that, but be able to keep this team together and to finish the way that they did. And then a microcosm of that bowl game. I mean, you want to talk about peaks and valleys in an actual game itself. I mean, to hold this team together, keep them where they are, and come out in that second half and do what they did, that says a lot about the head coach to me.
I agree, Vince, and I think there's multiple times he was on the verge of losing this team if he didn't handle things correctly.
Yes.
And I think
Absolutely.
the first time, and this is kind of one of the things that we were going to discuss later, and I want to tie it into here, is one of the things he did a good job of this year is just being honest.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you're not honest with yourself, you're gonna struggle. And I mean, like after the Marshall game, I mean, at one point it's like, I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that honesty. I appreciate the fact that he didn't kind of go in there and try to spin it and say, oh, this is the case and that's the case. This other thing is all going on. And he was honest with it, and he was able to sort of identify here's kind of what happened. And the first time it was just about handle the emotions. That's what they needed to do after the Marshall loss. We need to handle the emotions and make sure our team is regaining confidence. And so what you saw from him over the next 12 weeks, when you include the bye week and then 10 games and then, bowl prep, it's over 12 weeks. Honestly, is you look at the situation, Vince, and he knew that this team was teetering on the verge of just complete collapse from a confidence standpoint. So what was his mantra? You are a great football team. You're 0-2. How can you say that? Because he's sitting there saying, like, we need to boost their confidence because they're not playing to the potential we think that they have as a football program. And so he went out there and that was his message. That was what he preached to them. And that's what he knew. But then after the Stanford loss, it was, okay, now it's time for me to step in and say, I'm going to now – a little bit of tough love is needed now.
Yeah.
Right. So be able to read the room that way, in my opinion, was savvy for a guy who's 36 years old and is a first-time head coach and had only coached as a defensive coordinator at a Power 5 school for what, 1 year?
1 year.
So I really feel like those are all things that are positives for, can he handle, because see that at the end of the day, Vince, that right there is one of the most important things for a head coach to be is, you could be an average X's and O's guy and be a great head coach. And perfect example, Dabo Swinney.
Yeah.
I don't think Dabo's a great X's and O's guy, meaning like he's not Lincoln Riley
football.
with these.
He understands football.
What I mean is like Lincoln Riley's this X's and O's guy and this real, Dabo's more of a here's what I believe in. Here's what this team needs to be. He understands how important it is for a head coach to establish the identity of a football team. And then we've always said this, identity is not what offense you run or what defense you run. It's how you go about your business on a daily basis. That's what I mean by Dabo not being an X's and O's guy. Not that Dabo just thinks,
and he's excellent at that,
I only know 3 routes and 2 run plays. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that's not his emphasis. I mean, he's very involved in the game decisions on offense and all that. But my whole thing is he understands his number one priority is I've got to create the culture of this football program beyond what our X's and O's and all that kind of stuff is. And for Marcus Freeman to show that was important. And that was one of the questions that I had. Is he going to be an X's and O's guy, a scheme guy? I think during the season he learned that I've got to be more than that, because you don't know it and you don't know how to handle it until you go through it, Vince. I mean, you can say, well, when this comes, I'm going to do this. But to be able to read the room was important. And when this team needed a kick in the pants and when this team needed some love, he felt like he tried to handle it differently every time. And I think that's very, very important and a very important lesson to learn, that he didn't need to go through 2 or 3 years to learn that. I mean, he had to learn that after 2 games.
Yeah.
Right. And then, another way mid through the season, and to get your team to kind of come out and be locked in a bowl game where, yes, South Carolina was ranked higher than Notre Dame, but let's be honest, it's South Carolina. there's not a kids on Notre Dame's roster that are looking like, wow, South Carolina, like on the same level as Georgia and Bama, Ohio State, and Clemson. And they came out and just battled. And I think those are the things that that sort of excite me for coach, what we learned from Coach Freeman. And I think along those same lines is they're not there yet. They're not there yet, Vince. But it was very clear that Marcus Freeman is desiring to establish more toughness with his football team. And I actually think at times maybe they went over too far with their practices. Like, I think that he wants toughness so much, and he realized it was so important because, as you and I have said, Notre Dame has not been a physical football team in a while. They've had years where their offensive line was physical, 2020, but their defense wasn't very physical in 2020, in my opinion. They were a soft team in 2021 in a lot of ways. 2019, 2018, there were parts of the ball, parts of the team that were physical, but it was like the 2018s were the anomalies. They weren't the norm when you look at this football team in the last few years. And it got worse and worse and worse as the years went on.
It's true.
And I think that that's something where Coach Freeman said, hey, we've got to fix this. We've got to become more physical. We got to be tougher. And I think they pushed him a little too hard in practice at times. I believe that. But I think it was, we're doing it in order to establish a culture of you've got to compete, you've got to battle. And I'm a believer, Vince, that you tell me if you disagree with this. I'm actually okay that they overdid it in year one.
That's
because, number one, I don't think it led to like a lot of injuries. It wasn't like they were just going full on scrimmages Monday through Friday. That's not what we're talking about. But they pushed them past really kind of the point that I think they're normally used to, and the point that I'd probably would do, not in a where I felt anyone's being exposed to harm. Just I think it takes your legs away. It just you become more fatigued. You're not as fresh. And I think at times we saw a team that just wasn't as fresh as it should have been early in the year. But I felt like it was because he felt we've got to do this now, because I would be willing to bet that Marcus Freeman believes what I'm about to say. It's easier for me to pull back or like loosen up after establishing a really tough regiment than it is for me to kind of be a little bit looser early. It doesn't respond well, and then I got to become harder.
So,
like that's the thing for me, is like start hard, and then if I got to pull back a little bit, I can pull back a little bit. But if you start with a softer mentality and then you ramp it up, it's going to appear as though you're overreacting to a negative that happened. Oh, well, we didn't play well, so now coach wants us to go do this.
Right.
I think it was wise to do it that way. I'm just curious if they will pull back in a way while also saying, hey, we still got to be tough. We still got to be physical. We still got to do these things, but let's find a nice balance between that and also making sure that when we get to Saturdays, we're a fresh football team.
So a couple points to that. Number one, I think from a football standpoint, raising the bar as far as the physicality and the toughness and all of that in year one specifically, and maybe even a little bit into year two, to be honest with you, is basically it's setting the bar at a certain place where, look, the majority of this team was fairly young. I mean, you talked about it, right? 8 true sophomores started on offense, right? Offensively. And there's some young guys that everybody's all Twitter about on defense, right? We know this, and they're going to end up being the foundation of this team moving forward, just like any college, right? I mean, the foundation changes all the time as far as who's going to be, the rock of the team. So setting the bar where they did does two things. Number one, I think that it was coach-led this year. And then even if the coaches kind of take it back a little bit, it's going to be player-led moving forward. Like, hey, we know what we're capable of from a physicality standpoint. This is where we need to be. This is where we're going to take it. Like, I feel like, okay, we're going to set the bar here as coaches. This is where, as a head coach, as Marcus Freeman, this is where I want it to be. And even if we take our foot off the gas a little bit, now it's up to the players and the leadership to keep us at that level without us having to push those buttons every single time. So I think there's part of that. That's my first point. My second point, and it's funny that you bring this up, Brian, because one of the first things you learn when you are in college and learning to be a teacher is that you go in at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of your career or whatever, it's kind of a hard ass. Like, you go in and you have rules, you have expectations, little things you get in trouble for. Like, we are setting the bar here. It is incredibly easy to go from here and then to kind of take it back a little bit, as opposed to the other direction where you come in all loosey-goosey, everything's allowed, and then
that's
you try
my
to drop
point.
the hammer.
And what did we hear about Lou Holtz when he first got hired? First thing he does, sit up, take your hats off.
Right.
Like, I'm letting you know right now, this is how we're going to be and how we're not going to be. Exactly. And I think that you're correct on that. And I'll be honest with you, Vince, this is probably not going to be received well by some, especially players and parents. But I think one of the issues that Notre Dame had this year was the veteran leadership of some players. Not that they had bad attitudes, but there was still some of a, well, we did it this way before and it worked. Why are we doing it this way?
Yeah, right.
And so I do think that was an issue at time, and not to the point where, again, I'm not trying to make it seem like it was this giant cancer and they were horrible players and I'm sad to see them all leave. I'm not saying that, but we also have to be honest about, at times, I think there was unnecessary pushback from the veterans, as opposed to just say, hey man, how about you just trust us and see how it goes? And then of course, when they had the early losses, it was see, this is, like I had somebody tell me one time that they were on a plane with a parent of a veteran.
Yeah.
After one of the losses, and like, well, this team wouldn't have lost this game if Brian Kelly was still here. And it's like, that's exactly what you heard from the veterans. Micah, I'll tell you, so you know who never said that? Benjamin Morrison. Right? Because he doesn't know. It's like, this is just he was completely bought into what this staff was telling him to do. Yeah. And you know what? Look at what he did.
Right.
The young running backs were completely bought into what Dylan McCullough was teaching to them, right? I'm not saying Chris Tyree wasn't. I'm just making a point of guys that had less experience. Now, they both played under Lance Taylor, who was a good football coach.
Sure.
But because they were younger and it wasn't as established, and, Kelly wasn't even there for a full year with those guys, it was, hey, I'm going to trust the coaches. Like, there was some buy-in with Harry Heastan, right? Like, so it wasn't at every position, but there were some positions where there just wasn't the same buy-in, and I think that that's partly why we saw some of the things that we saw, and so I think that's kind of why you have to go pedal to the metal early on. Say, hey, look, I'm not Brian Kelly. This isn't Brian Kelly's regime, and if you want to play for Brian Kelly, go into the portal and we'll go play for Brian Kelly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why you are seeing a little bit of purging from this football team, if we're going to be completely honest about it. Is because he's going to want people that are bought into, we're going to do it my way. And if you don't want to do it my way, totally fine, but you're going to just not be a part of this team anymore. And that's just really what it comes down to. Yeah. And so I think that's important. And I think that's where that toughness aspect comes from. Because physical toughness, in my opinion, Vince, leads to mental toughness. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't ever get physically challenged, then you're not going to have the mental toughness in many instances to then be prepared to handle when the physicality becomes game-like. And that's kind of my issue. Mm-hmm. So I think we did learn that. Yeah. We also saw a coach, one of the clearest things that we ever saw like this year, and we could have led with this. If we were doing this of order of most obvious, then this would be number one. Brian Kelly believes in the importance of playing great special teams. Something Marcus we had Freeman. Not seen in a – I'm sorry. Yes, because Brian Kelly definitely does not.
I was like, what are you saying?
Brian Kelly never bought into that. No. But unlike his predecessor, how about that?
There you go.
Unlike his predecessor, Marcus Freeman flat out believes, because I was thinking Brian Mason. So that's what I was
Oh, God. Yeah, no, makes sense. No, and
with the hiring of Brian Mason and then the emphasis on special teams throughout the year, getting I actually would have liked for them to play more young guys on special teams, but he was trying to set in a tone. And that's something Lou Holtz did very early in his tenure as well. Is we're going to play great special teams. Now, they're not where they need to be yet. I want to see the return game get better in some other areas, and the kicking's got to get better. But if you're a starter and you're the best guy on special teams, we're going to use you. And you've got to take pride in that. And it got to the point that once they started having success on special teams, it's like they even said during the year, like guys were asking, hey, can I be on special teams? Can I be on special teams? Because you're seeing now how you can impact the game. And I think that's a very important thing. Very important thing, because I don't know if some games turn out the way that they do if it's not for special teams. Like, does Notre Dame really? I mean, I still think they beat Clemson, but is it the way that they beat Clemson if it's not for special teams? Right? Do they beat Navy if they don't have the block punt that led to a score? I mean, there's all types of things that you look at and say, boy, I don't. Do you if you don't have the confidence in your special teams to do that fake? What happens in the South Carolina game if you give them the ball back and you've got stopped? So. It was so obvious to me that Marcus Freeman is a believer in special teams have got to be given more than lip service from an important standpoint. Because we saw this with when the former coach went down to LSU, and I'm not trying to make this a Brian Kelly bash fest, but this is a part of the game. And you look at what they lost to Florida State by 1 point. How many special teams miscues do they have in that game? Fumbling punt returns.
So many.
Can't even make an extra point at the end of the game. Happened against Tennessee. Early special teams miscues. Happened against Georgia.
There was even a miscue in the Purdue game where they were smoking them.
Right. So, like, you're Georgia, though, like, that's what loses you those games. It's 7-0. Your offense is driving. You're getting a chance to get some points on the board, block a field goal. What happens? Your team doesn't have the awareness that ball can be advanced. Georgia picks it up and runs it back for a touchdown, and now all of a sudden it's 14-0.
Right.
And you never recovered. That's stuff we saw at Notre Dame in the past. You think of the last time Notre Dame played a game in Jacksonville. What was really one of the biggest things that really cost them that game against Navy in 2016? It was the special teams where they had too many guys on the field, and they couldn't got Devin Sudsell off the field in time. You get flagged for too many men on the field. It was 4th and 3, I think, and Navy gets a first down, and they go down and score. And a game you lost by a point. So it's like those things were constant. That's not going to be the case based on what we saw from Marcus from year one.
No.
And that's huge.
And it started with his insistence on going and getting Brian Mason and making that a priority. I mean, that's where it started. If we're talking about his propensity to make special teams an important piece of what his tenure at Notre Dame is going to be and his head coaching tenure, starting here and moving on into the future, he made it a priority to get Brian Mason. That was one of the first guys that he went out and got, and I realized that there were not many defections immediately from the staff, and that was one of them. And so he had to go and fill it. I mean, I get that part, right? Because who all left? I mean, it was just him. It was just the two coaches. It was the head coach and special teams coach are the original ones that left to go to LSU, right? So that was the first opening that he had, but that told us so much about who he was going to be and where his priorities were. He didn't go out and just hire a position coach, you know what I mean? And then figure out special teams moving forward. He went out and got who he believed, and a lot of outsiders believed, is one of the best special teams coaches in the country. And yes, he had a prior relationship with him that I'm sure helped. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure that helped. But he went and got the best guy for that job that was out on the market, like, you know what I mean, that was available, and brought him in. It was very clear from the get-go, special teams are important by going and getting Brian Mason, period.
No.
Period.
And then how do you handle it? Because I'll be honest with you, the players didn't respect Brian Polian. They didn't. Right. I mean, it's Vince, how many stories have you and I heard about that? They didn't.
So many.
There's a difference there with Brian Mason because, I mean, the kids love him. Right. And he's demanding and hard on him. But it's like kids view like getting a starting job on special teams is something to be proud of. Right. And that's a culture thing. That's a mentality thing. That's not just especially nowadays, Vince, so many of these kids. So, I mean, there's kids that look, let's be real. There's kids that Notre Dame signs, at other schools, and Bama signs that didn't play special teams in high school. Right. Unless they were returning kicks. Well, I'm the star. I'm not going to run down and kick off.
It's my chance to take a break,
right.
or whatever the kid.
And sometimes that makes sense. I mean, if the kid's a starter on offense and defense, and he's your, you know what I mean? Like, there are times you need to find breathers. But there's also kids that are like, well, I was a 5-star. What the heck am I going to be doing running down on kickoff? But that's not the mentality that they're going to have for Notre Dame. At Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman. And that's huge. And it was given lip service in the past, Vince, but it never actually played out that way.
The best players I always had, and I obviously I was at high school, you were at the college level. The best players I always had, they wanted to be on the field all the time. Whether it was special teams or otherwise, like they wanted to be on the field. And they are creating that community and that feeling at Notre Dame, which has not always been the case. Now, in the past, there have been some guys that have Chase Claypool, for example. He wanted to be on special teams. I feel like that was more Chase Claypool than it was Brian Polian. That's me. That's how I believe it, because I didn't see that across the board. There were a couple of guys out there that were like, I want to be on special teams. I want to be able to make an impact all the time. But it's just so different. It's hard to explain. It's so different than what it is now. That's an across the board feeling. Like these guys want to be on special teams. They want to be contributing in any way possible to the ultimate goal of being successful, of winning.
Yeah.
It's different.
Agree. Another thing that we saw, obviously, look, recruiting is going to be an emphasis here, and I don't care where it's ranked. This is an outstanding recruiting class. It's going to be an important thing. I think this last thing too, Vince, is important, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I want to harp on it now. I think Marcus Freeman showed a willingness to self-analyze his team and himself in real time. Meaning not waiting until after the season to realize this has got to change, right? And which is why things didn't snowball this year. And it kind of ties back into that first point about why this team was resilient. Part of it is your head coach has got to show, because here's two mistakes that coaches can make, Vince, and I think you're going to agree with me on this. Number one is when things go bad, you just change everything. We're starting from scratch,
right?
And we'll use that expression from as sort of a hyperbolic statement, but you don't just come out and say, we were doing this all year, but now we're just going to change everything and try to implement all these new things because we're losing. You're going to keep losing. But you also can make the mistake of erring aside of, nope, we're going to keep doing it exactly how we've been doing it because we believed in this and we're not going to change and we're just going to keep going down this path. Marcus Freeman showed this year that, hey, look, there are certain core principles that are never going to change. Mm-hmm. But we do need to look at some other things because what we're doing right now is not working. And I think and this is about your football team, and this is also about yourself and how you're running your program. And I think one of the things that Marcus Freeman tried to be early on, and this is a common thing, I think, for young, new head coaches, is especially those who actually care about relationships with people. Mm-hmm. Like really arrogant guys don't think about this because they don't care about anybody else. It's what I'm going to do. Marcus Freeman's not that way. He's very personable. He cares about people, cares about families and all that. As an assistant coach, what do you always want, Vince? Hey, look, let me just do my thing. Trust me as an assistant coach to do my thing, and we'll be fine. And I think Marcus Freeman people kept calling him a player's coach. And what we would say here at IB is, no, he's not a player's coach. He's a coach's coach. And I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I think he made, to be completely honest with you, is he gave too much leeway to his assistant coaches, and there just wasn't the same buy-in from some of the players, and they weren't all kind of on the same page. And after the Stanford game, he kind of stepped up and said, okay, we're going to make some changes. Now we're still going to be a team that's about this, and this, but we're going to be more player driven. And I think we still saw some times on defense where that wasn't the case as much. Being like my dad called me, he was like, he's talking about Tommy Rees, and the thing that Tom Rees needs to prove to him is that he can run a system that is player-driven, where he builds the offense around his players. I think we saw that more in the second half of the year, where I think in like the Marshall-Ohio State game, it was just kind of like, here's what I want to run, and we're going to go out and run it. But I think later in the year, second half of the year, it was like, okay, here's my team. Here's what I have at quarterback. Here's what I have the offensive line. What are our strengths? And then we're going to play to them. And then one of the keys to the game for us which was an unknown at the time, is will Tommy Rees play to who the team is now and not who the team was during the regular season.
Yeah, going into the Gator Bowl you're talking
right,
about.
Exactly. Yeah. And he did. I mean, we saw it was a heavy 11 personnel team.
Yep.
We saw 21 personnel. We saw 20 personnel. I was told by a source the other day that they repped 10 personnel during the week of practice, thinking like if the need is there and we've got to kind of push things, it wasn't something that they're going to just come out and be a 10, but like if the need was there, and they had to throw the football and they had to go tempo, could that have been there? And there were some packages there for that. And it was very much playing to, as we said, Mitchell Evans is going to catch the ball, but you're not building your offense around the tight end anymore.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
And so
had very impactful catches, but it wasn't Michael Mayer.
3rd and 15 conversion, the go-ahead touchdown.
Right.
Exactly, Vince. But it wasn't the focal point of the offense when you're building out. It was a complement to the other things. Right. What was the focal point of the game plan? It was the running backs.
Yes.
Which is where it should have been. And then Jaden Thomas, who had been their most consistent receiver during the year, taking some shots at Deion Colsey.
And we had finding ways to
the
amount of RPOs
finding ways to get Braden Lindsey the football. They got Braden Lindsey the football pretty early, first quarter. They ran a jet to him.
Yep.
So it's one of those things, all the things we've been wanting to see, because why? That's what the personnel dictated.
Yes.
He had a quarterback that he felt could do those things.
Correct.
And so I think that's where Coach Freeman kind of stepped in and said, especially defensive, said, hey, we're going to do this. And I think that's why the defense got so much better down the stretch. And then they went away from that in the USC game, and it cost them.
Yeah.
And so I think there's still work to be done. But I think the big thing is being willing to look in the mirror and say, what do I have to do to fix this? What did I do that put us here? And then what I got to do to fix it? And sometimes it's like, no, I didn't do anything to put us here. This happened over here, and it's going to get addressed. But sometimes it's like, well, this guy did something. Why? Because I put him in position to make that mistake.
Mm-hmm.
That's on me. My quarterback threw a pick because I didn't prepare him for what happens if we don't get the look that they showed us during the week of practice. That's on me, not my quarterback. I'm talking about from my experience. I'm not talking about Tommy. It's not, for me, as a former, if my receiver goes out there and breaks his route off because he wasn't sure how to handle the coverage they were showing at him because I didn't rep him during a week of practice, that and the quarterback throws it where the receiver's supposed to be and it gets picked off, that's not on the quarterback, that's not on the receiver, that's on me. And I got to know that. And you got to be able to differentiate those things as a coach. And for a long time, Vince, that was one of the biggest complaints we had, is every time something went wrong, the head coach was always looking who else to blame.
My goodness.
And I really feel like in a lot of ways, Marcus Freeman first looked, what do I got to fix?
Yes.
Right. And was honest about it and saying it publicly, to the point where some people say, I think he's too honest.
Yes.
And that's a very refreshing thing. And he'll learn from that. But I would rather take a coach who's want to say, you know what? Because players will respect the heck out of that.
Yep.
Because, and it's not just him doing it publicly, because Kelly would always like fall on the sword publicly, and then you'd kind of see what happened behind the scenes. You're like, nope, that's not. But Freeman would then go in there and say that to the kids and to the coaches and those kind of things, like, hey, we got to do better. And then they would go out there and they'd see the do better in practice. Because you can tell kids, especially Notre Dame players, these are savvy, smart kids. And you can tell them, you can give them all the lip service they want, but if they don't see it in action, they're not going to give a crap what you say to them in person. And these kids saw, in a lot of ways, that.
Well, and I think we got a glimpse of that when he was defensive coordinator too. You know what I mean? Which gave me at least a bit of optimism when he became the head coach that he would be similar, right? We've all heard the story about after the Florida State game, and he had the wrong call in, it led to a big play, et cetera, and he went in front of the defense. He's like, "That's on me, guys. I have to be better. That's on me." And so he won the defense over that day. If he hadn't already, he definitely won them over that day. But that's only one half of the ball, or one half, right, of the team moving forward. Now you're the head coach. The offense didn't have an opportunity to see that side of Marcus Freeman, really. I mean, they knew that he was a good guy, and they wanted him as the head coach and all of that. But they never saw that side of him. You know what I'm saying? And they had that opportunity to see that side of him this year. And I think it only solidified the relationships that he has built with the players, with the coaches, with the entire program, top to bottom. The most refreshing thing for me is he didn't change from being a defensive coordinator to being a head coach, at least from what we're able to tell.
Well,
in a good way.
Yeah, there are some areas where here's where I'll say this. He didn't change. You're spot on. The thing he's going to have to show as a head coach, however, and well, you know what? Let me hold off on that, because
that's going to be the things we don't know yet.
Yes,
right.
He personally did not change.
And that's huge for me, because you've seen it. I know you have, when you're a coworker or somebody and all of a sudden they get put into a position of power, they change. And I'm not saying defensive coordinator is not a position of power, but you're not the guy. Like, the buck doesn't stop with you. When he became the head coach at Notre Dame, that's an awful lot of power, man. And it's very tempting to change, right? We saw a lot of changes in Brian Kelly from beginning to end of his tenure at Notre Dame.
Some good.
Some good.
Some not good.
Some not good. But changes.
Right.
I didn't see any fundamental changes with Marcus Freeman from the time that he showed up at Notre Dame as a defensive coordinator to now. I mean, and I'm talking fundamental changes with who he is.
Right.
I didn't see those changes, which is great. He's still that guy. Now, we're going to talk about things that we don't know if he's going to be able to do right? Because we haven't seen it yet. But
Mhm.
as of right now, to me, that is extremely refreshing that he didn't change. He's still that guy, even though he's now the head coach.
And that's got to continue, right?
Absolutely.
It's going to have to
Yes.
continue.
Because
But
we'll
yes.
bring it up if it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like we'll talk about, man, this is not the same guy that he was in year one. You know,
Yeah.
things have changed. And I don't know if
And
that's
there will be some changes. I mean, everybody evolves and adapts and
sure.
changes. Like I'm trying to remember what the show was. It was really funny, but the way the guy said it was it was kind of funny, but I can't remember what the show was that I was watching. But he basically was talking about marriage.
Okay.
And he goes, you've got to say I do to multiple people. Person's like, I don't have a clue what you're talking about right now. Like, that I'm trying. What was the show I was watching? But they're talking about how like it was. So he's like, I don't understand what that means. Like that makes no sense to me. And the guy responding goes, what I'm saying is you're going to change over time. I can't believe I don't remember what show. I was just watching it yesterday. You're going to change over time. And this is someone who's been married over a decade. I've been married, we're going to have our, I think, 15th wedding anniversary coming up in April, my wife and I.
We're gonna be at 19.
And
So
I'm not the same guy that I was when we got married.
yeah,
I'm not the same guy I was 7-8 years ago as a husband.
sure.
And you're not, and Angela's not. And I've got to like Angela said something to me the other day. It was kind of jokingly. She's like, do you got to stop telling me you love me no matter what. Because there's something we were just kind of joking about how I wanted to do something more often or not. It's like around the house or something like that. And I was like, no. I love you for who you are, no matter what. Who you are is going to change and evolve over time. Doesn't mean that I don't love you, but that's the thing is, you hear people that say things. I'm like, well, you're not the same person I married, and that's why the marriage fails. If you thought that person was going to be the same person for the next 30 years, that's a you problem, not a them problem. Right. And so it's one of those things where it is. But you've got to still be at the core who you are. I'm still someone who values treating my wife with respect and trying to find ways to show her love and do all that. So at the core, you don't change, but how that manifests and the things that you like and don't like and all that kind of stuff is going to be different. Same thing with a head coach. You're going to evolve. You're going to change. You're going to, hey, this practice thing I want to do differently. And I want to do this scheme now because I think of this, that, or the other thing. But at your core, caring about young people, having an open door, all those kind of things have to be still at the core of who you are. And I think that's something that we did see from Marcus Freeman in year one, because that's when you usually will lose it. I'm head coach now. I got to do all these things differently.
Right.
And we're going to see a little bit in year two, because we're going to look at it from the standpoint of, okay, now that things didn't necessarily go your way, are you then going to overreact at all? So there's a little bit of an unknown there, Vince, but at least in year one, he certainly showed that, in my opinion. Let's dive into the second part of this, Vince, and that is the areas that remain question marks. And I want to continue with the discussion we just completed because it ties in together. One of the hardest things for a head coach to do when he's young and first year as a coach, and you are someone who cares about other people, is making tough decisions. That's a big question mark, because Marcus Freeman has some very tough decisions to make this year from a player standpoint, and even more importantly, from a coaching standpoint. Now, making changes doesn't always mean firing people. Sometimes it does, though. Sometimes it can mean sitting down with someone who you're friends with, who you know, whose wife you know, whose kids you know, who you view truly as a friend who's not doing the job. You got to be able to sit down with him and say, this isn't good enough. How you're doing it is not good enough. And then sometimes that, for me, the first thing that pops in my head is Al Washington, right? Like Al Washington did a bad job this year, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. He didn't recruit very well. He didn't coach the defensive line very well.
Right.
I've heard a lot of things behind the scenes about how he didn't connect with the players really well. And when you're coming from replacing a coach like Mike Elston, who literally had his players in his home as much as the NCAA would allow, that's going to be a big problem.
Right.
And I think that with some of the other coaches on staff, some of the newer coaches, not all of them have the same mindset on the kids are your family like Marcus Freeman did as a defensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
And not all of them, and I'm not going to say specifically who, but there was enough to where it was noticed. And that's something he's going to have to step in and say, if you're going to work for me, this is something that's mandated. If it's nothing you've done before, that's fine, but you're going to be that way now, and hold people accountable when they don't. You're going to do a job as a recruiter, and if you don't do that job well enough, he has said before, you can't work here if you're not a great recruiter. He said that. Okay, well, let's put your money where your mouth is now, right? Now, that doesn't mean, again, firing. It means, hey, bro, I'll give you one more shot, but this can't happen again.
Can't continue.
Yeah. Right. This has to change. And I think that's going to be a very important thing for me. You know, sitting down, and sometimes it can be sitting down with a veteran coach who you respect. I think there's a lot of respect from Marcus Freeman to Al Golden. I think Marcus Freeman respects Al Golden and his knowledge and experience a lot. But Marcus Freeman also has to be able to step in and say, hey, this isn't good enough. We've got to do things differently.
Right.
And then command that respect on the opposite end. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying this needs to happen. But for me, though, that's going to be a big thing that we don't know yet about Marcus Freeman is, can he make the tough personnel choices from a player standpoint? I think to a degree we're seeing that already, but even more so from a coaching standpoint. I'm not saying he has done it. He won't do it. I'm just saying that's an unknown.
Yeah.
These are the things we need to see, because just going into year 2 saying, well, hopefully it gets better next year, I'm going to give everybody a second year to get better. That's fine if you want to keep your staff intact because you want to give them another chance, but that has to come with some really heart-to-heart, if this doesn't change, you got to go conversations.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you don't want to have coaches just feel like they're always coaching for their jobs just because, but sometimes guys need to know, hey, you're coaching for your job.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened this past year is not good. What happened off the field is not good enough. What happened on the field is not good enough. What happened on the recruiting trail is not good enough. And that's the standard we set. Because once you start allowing coaches who you are friendly with or you had a relationship with kind of get away with things, then others are going to be like, well, why do I have to bust my butt and be on the do this and do this and do this and do this when I'm getting results and this guy over here is not getting results and we're treated the same way? Like, forget this. And that's something that you can't allow to develop and grow in your program.
Yeah, and along those lines, and we're talking about unknowns, and you and I kind of talked about this on the phone prior to, but a little bit different. So hope I'm not going too far out in the left field here. But part of the unknown for me, and it goes right along the lines of the coaching staff and what we know about Marcus Freeman and what he was able to do in his first year. Being a first-year head coach, especially at Notre Dame, it's very synonymous with drinking out of a fire hose. There's a lot coming at you. A lot of your reactions is just that. They're reactions. Like, you're reacting to a lot of things. Now, I think he was very proactive in a lot of ways. I think he did a very good job. All of those things. Like, I 100% agree with that. Things are going to slow down for him now. It's just like a first-year starter at quarterback, right? Your second year, things are going to slow down for you. Well, things are going to slow down for Marcus Freeman a little bit. Does that change his approach? Whether it's with the coaching staff, whether it's the offseason, whether it's with the players, the relationship side of things. Like, year 2 is going to be a very telling year from a day-to-day standpoint with Marcus Freeman, because it's going to feel to him like things have slowed down. Oh, you know what? I've got some time for maybe an extra week of vacation, or maybe I'll hit the golf. I'm not saying I'm speaking in generalities. I don't even know if Marcus Freeman's a golfer, but you know what I mean? Like, you know what? These guys are going to be fine for a couple of weeks. I'm going to go take a break, or I'm going to do this, or you know what? I don't need to make this road trip to go visit a recruit this week. I want to go watch my son's wrestling tournament instead, and of course, there's a fine line to all of that where you can potentially do both and you can do all these things, but he's not going to be drinking out of the fire hose anymore. And what is that going to look like in year 2 and beyond? Because he's going to feel like he's got a handle on things to a degree. And it's I hate to use the word complacency, but there's a piece of that. Once you've been in a job for X amount of time, you get complacent with it. You're like, okay, I know what to expect. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Just keep paddling, whatever the case may be. I'm very interested to see if he stays aggressive, if he stays proactive, if he stays the same guy on the recruiting trail that he's always been. I think he will. But there's going to be that temptation there at times where, oh, I know that I have to go speak to this group, or I know I have to do that. It's just going to be different. It's just going to be different when you've been in the job for over a year. And we're in that neighborhood now. He's been in the job for over a year. He's had the post bowl game time period. He's had spring practice. He's had the off season. What does that look like moving forward? That I am actually intrigued to find out what that looks like for Marcus Freeman as a head coach in year 2. And if anything changes, good or bad, now that he's done it, and he's on the second lap.
Here's a comment that Salty made that I want to clear up, because it's different. And it's kind of in response to us saying he's got to show he can make some tough choices. He goes, do I have this right? Del Alexander was likely to remain on staff, but after the Fiesta Bowl, Marcus Freeman sent him on his way. No, that's not accurate. Like, there was rumblings that he was going to be back because there had been no word. Like, there was word about Jeff Quinn. Found out after he was literally let go like the day after the game, but publicly, but he was told after the Fiesta Bowl he wasn't coming back. Or he told people after the Fiesta Bowl he wasn't coming back, which meant he had to have known beforehand, is what I'm trying to say. He wasn't fired in the locker room.
It wasn't like a locker room situation.
No,
yeah, right.
But like right after the game, he was telling people like, I'm done here and all that other kind of stuff, which meant he knew beforehand. So no, he wasn't going to be brought back. But again, it's a lot easier to even if this scenario were true, it's a lot easier to fire someone that you did not hire and that you didn't know before you came here and worked with for a year and who did a bad job, as opposed to someone who you've known for a long time and you consider a friend, which is why you brought him on staff before, because that was the big concern with Brian Kelly. He would hire people that he was friends with and then hold them to a lower standard than he did other coaches.
Yeah.
And he would allow them, like Brian Van Gorder shouldn't have even gotten into year 2, in my opinion, much less year 3.
Yeah.
And there were other coaches, Jeff Quinn, not being held accountable for not doing a better job. There's all these type of things where it's like, like last year, how he was publicly harder on the defense than he was the offense.
Yeah.
Even though the defense was clearly last year's team's best unit. Well, that just can't be. You know, the people that you are closest with, you have to be willing to hold them to the same standard that you do others. Like you wonder if like Kirk Ferentz is dealing with this. Would Kirk Ferentz allow an offensive coordinator who's not his son to have the production or lack thereof the last couple of years that he's allowed his son to get away with?
Yeah. That makes it even harder when it's your son. Like,
but my point is
right,
like,
but I get it. Yeah, totally.
That's the danger of hiring someone that you have a personal connection with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing that he's got to show to me, that he can. And again, it's not always about firing somebody. Sometimes it's about, you need to be very stern and sit down and say, hey, look, this isn't acceptable. And if it doesn't change, then I'm going to move on. And if you don't think you can make those changes, let me know now, and we can help you. I can help you find another job. Because that's the other way to do it, is you sometimes not even fire somebody. Hey, look, man, you need to maybe look around and see what else is out there.
Yeah.
Let's do this the right way. Let's do this the way where you get a save face a little bit. That's one thing Brian Kelly was really good at. When Brian Kelly did let somebody go, he rarely fired coaches. But it was always like, hey, you may want to go find another job. And that's how he got.
He would put in a good word for coaches and try to get them that job too.
Right.
Knowing give him credit
they weren't coming back.
Right.
That's smart. I mean, that's savvy. That's sometimes how it's got to be, because then there's not that perception that, hey, I fired this guy. It's like more so, hey, this guy got a great opportunity that he couldn't pass up.
Right.
Kind of thing. So, all right. So, Vince, that's one thing. I think another thing that we have to question, this is one you brought up, is development.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is there's no way that, no matter what happened this year, good or bad, there's no way for us to know how good Marcus Freeman and his coaching staff is going to be at developing players. Now, we know what he did at Cincinnati.
Sure.
And we know the job that obviously he did with the defense last year. But looking long term, it's impossible for us to know how good development at Notre Dame is going to be.
Yes.
Because they just haven't been here long enough. It's something that happens over time, not coming in and taking a player like Isaiah Foskey, who was a 2-year player that had shown potential, and then He steps in. That's not necessarily development to me. Like Al Golden coming in and all of a sudden, Cam Hart's still pretty good. Okay. Like that's not development to me. Development is Mike Mickens taking Cam Hart 3 years ago, who's a converted receiver and had no clue how to really play cornerback, and then turning him into what he's become now.
Right.
Taking a Benjamin Morrison and getting him ready to play. Right. So we see it at certain positions. We saw the development from Harry Heastan. So like there's a track record there in the past with position coaches. I feel confident with the staff that Marcus Freeman's put together that as long as they stay running back, O-line, cornerback, for sure, not a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not a problem. Now, Jared Parker and Chancey Stuckey, it's just like, I got to see you do it longer. I saw some good signs this year, but I got to see you do it longer. The reason I feel that way about Mickens is because he's done it at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Right?
And he's had more of an opportunity. I mean, he's been there for 3 years.
Exactly.
So you talk about the longevity piece.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. And
with Harry Heastan and Dealin, it's not based on what they did at Notre Dame. It's what they've done in their careers.
Sure.
Including with Harry, what he did at Notre Dame before.
Right.
So there's a track record of success there. With Coach Freeman as the head coach, we need to see that track record established. And Vince, if they'd have gone 13-0 this year, that's not about development.
Question.
That's taking
Absolutely.
a team that had a certain level of development that was already established, and then reaching. It's more about, can you take these young classes and get them? Can you guys go out and turn Josh Burnham into a stud?
Right.
Can you turn, great Benjamin Morrison, but can you get Jaden Mickey going? Right? Can you take Tobias Merriweather and turn him into a dude? Jared Parker, you did a great job helping develop Michael Mayer's game because you could find little small things that he wasn't great at and mold on those. And that's a great coaching job with the star. But can you take Eli Raridan, who's a ball of clay, and Holden Stace, who's a ball of clay, and to get them to play like studs down the road? Those are all question marks to me because those guys don't have that track record. And Marcus Freeman as a head coach doesn't have that track record. And there's no way you can establish that track record in 1 year.
Right.
Like if all we were talking about with Mike Mickens was what he did with Benjamin Morrison, that's not really a track record. To me, it's look what he did with the kid that they got from NC State a couple years ago, right? Like that was a great recruiting job or development job. Look at what he's done with Cam Hart. Look at what he did with Tariq Bracy, who 2 years ago in 2020 just completely. I'm talking about Nick McLeod, the kid from NC State.
Yeah.
But look, Tariq Bracy 2 years ago just completely lost his confidence to the point where he couldn't play anymore.
Right.
And then they put him in mop-up duty against Syracuse, and he falls on his face, and they run for a 75-yard touchdown. Like, you're like, this kid can't play anymore. He lost. He went through what Gary Gray went through. Gary Gray never recovered. Tariq Bracy did. Now, that's part on Tariq, and that's also part on Mike Mickens finding ways to push the right buttons to get him back. Proven track record.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a lot of other places as the head coach and as an assistant coach is you got to prove that you can develop. And that ultimately all rests on the shoulders of Marcus Freeman, because it goes back to point one. If guys aren't getting the job done, are you able to go make the right decisions to let people go, but then make good hires to replace them? His track record as a coach and making hires is pretty good. I mean, but the funny thing is it's the offensive hires that so far have turned out to be better individual position coaching hires than the defensive ones. Now, in fairness, if Mike Mickens wasn't here, he would have hired him.
Yo,
you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of got to give him credit there, but like that's the side of the ball where the biggest question marks are right now for me is the defensive hires. That's actually somewhat remotely kind of calming for me. You know what I mean? Like, hey, he showed, because what's one of the big questions? Is he going to put as much emphasis on getting the offense to be coached as well as he is the defense? Well, hit a home run on that one. Harry Heastan and Dylan McCullough and Jared Parker and Chancey Stuckey, and well, hey, heck of a job there. Now, can he do the same thing on defense? I think that's the question for me, and then get the development where it needs to get to. Those are legitimate questions.
Yeah, so the development piece for me is a twofold, kind of a tiered thing. So it starts with recruiting, obviously, right? We know he's a good recruiter. We know recruiting is an aspect of his head coaching philosophy that is very, very important, and he's really, really good at it. And it's a lot of sweat equity that he has put into recruiting, no doubt about it. But from a development standpoint, we just don't know. Brian Kelly brought in some good classes. I mean, he brought in some good classes. But I think we can all agree that the development across the board wasn't there. They weren't able to develop those classes into classes that could lead them to that next tier for the program. Perennial 10-win team towards the end, that's awesome, but they couldn't get over that last hump. Part of that's recruiting. Part of that's development. We just don't know that about Marcus Freeman. So there's the recruiting class development, but then there's also the coach development. And when you're the head coach, one of the things I was taught a long time ago is when you're going to be a head coach, not only are you obviously coaching the players, but you have to be coaching your coaches at the same time. You have to be a coach developer so that those guys can develop the players. So it's almost like you're one spot removed from actually developing the players. Although with Marcus Freeman, he's very involved in all of the players, dapping everybody up before every practice and every game and all. He's got a relationship with every player, which I love. Don't get me wrong. But he's not there every rep at practice for every single player. It's impossible. And for us to want him to be that guy, that's impossible. That's an expectation that does not exist. But he has to be able to not only hold his coaches accountable, but he has to coach them up as well. Like that's his position group. His position group is the coaches.
And the challenge, Vince, is going to be with Al Golden and James Arnaitis at linebacker.
Yes.
Because that's the interesting one, is the worst position on this football team, in my opinion, this year was linebacker.
Yeah, it was.
For good chunks of the year.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have been, because we saw Jack Kaiser make mistakes he didn't make last year. We saw J.D. Bertrand make mistakes he didn't really make last year. And then Maris was just really struggled all season. And so that's going to be a big one too, because that's your baby.
Right.
Can you say, hey, look, guys, this you got to coach your coaches. Well, one of the hardest things to do as a 36-year-old is to coach a guy who's in his 50s.
Yeah.
Who has been a head coach as well at a big time program. And are you able to do that? And then is Al Golden going to be receptive to that? Those are not things we're saying he won't be. I'm not challenging Al Golden's character. I'm simply saying it's a question mark. We need to see it. Right. And if not, then move on. And if he is, then it could be fine.
It look, can be intimidating.
Yeah. To me, I want to see that coaches learn from their mistakes. And some of the coaches, I think we saw that. I think we saw Tommy Rees evolve over the course of the year, where things that he was doing that we didn't like evolved and changed. How he interacted with Drew Pine.
Mm-hmm.
I had an issue with that. Not to scream and do your effing job. I don't care about that. It was more of just the things you hear about just how demanding he is in practice. And he's got a lot of that Brian Kelly fire. I mean, you watch Tom Rees play, that's how he coaches.
Sure.
But then you hear things about how, as the year went on, Tommy changed. And he realized he needed to take a different approach with Drew. And that's when Drew started to play a little bit better down the stretch. And then he finishes the year with a really good game against USC. I'm curious what the interest level would have been for Drew Pine if it wasn't for the USC game. So those are things that you got to evolve. You've got to and adapt. And, Coach Freeman needs to make sure that Coach Washington and Coach Golden are doing that. I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying those are the things we need to see.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying they won't be receptive. I'm not saying he won't be willing to do it. I'm just saying it's
we don't know.
We need to see.
We don't. Right. I mean, we. The bottom line is we just don't know.
Right.
But that's the fun of this whole thing. That's to me, that's the fun of this whole thing is we don't know. And we're going to get to all go down that road together. We're going to take that ride together. And, if I'm a betting man, do I think it's going to be favorable moving forward? Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a lot of things about Marcus Freeman that I like, but there's still a lot of things that we just don't know after 1 year. I mean, that's what it is, right? So it's going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to it, but that's the biggest piece for me is the coach's part. That's the biggest piece for me because he is young. There's coaches on his staff that are older than him. It's like when I have to go talk to a teacher who is 20 years older than me and has been doing this forever, but I've got to talk about some stuff that maybe they're not doing great and it's affecting other people. Like, that's super intimidating. It's super intimidating. But you as a person of authority, and technically it's even more so for Marcus Freeman because he's their boss, like those are the conversations that have to be had. That's what a leader has to do. So you got to kind of wash away that intimidation factor, and you just got to have those tough conversations. That's all part of leadership, is having a tough conversation. So do I think he can? Of course I do. But will he? We don't know. And so it's going to be part of the fun of the whole thing, Brian.
It is. It is. I think there's some other things that you look at Vince and say, even though we praised him for being able to kind of look internally, how deep is he going to be able to go in some other areas? Still an unknown. And that it doesn't matter what happened this year. That's always an unknown, right? Like identified some areas, but will he be able to look at the practice plan and say, hey, you know what, maybe we need to alter this a little bit. Hey, what did we do from a staff standpoint? And, to say, hey, look, a lot of coaches can go, hey, we struggled at linebacker this year. It's just because our kids aren't good enough. We'll recruit better kids and we'll be fine. I can't stand that. I really can't stand when coaches are just that lazy with it. Sometimes it is that way, Vince. I mean, sometimes it's like, look, coaching is where it needs to be, but you just don't have a good enough player there, right? So let's go out and get better players. That's fine. But it just seemed in the past that was their go-to.
Yeah.
That was the only thing that you needed to see happen was that. I want to see Coach Freeman still do what?
Well, I was just going to say that what you said was like that was always the go-to, and you're absolutely 100% right. 100%. But then where was the enthusiasm for recruiting? Like if that was your go-to, then why weren't you putting in more effort on the recruiting trail? But like anyway, that it just struck me as funny when you said that. I was like talking out of both sides of his mouth.
Yeah, but that's the kind of the thing for me though, Vince, is like sometimes you aren't good enough at a position. And there are positions on this Notre Dame team where they're not talented enough.
Yeah.
They're not. And they've got to get better. But there are also positions where TCU isn't as talented as Georgia and Alabama and those teams. And they're going to play for national championship. Right? So, you have to be able to say, look, yeah, we got to get better there, but from a player standpoint, but we got to get better there as coaches. Whether that means we need to do a better job or I need to find someone to do a better job, that's going to be part of it. And sometimes coaches aren't willing to necessarily like, hey, I'll evaluate this, this, and this, but I'm not touching that one and that one, right? For whatever reason. And those are all part of kind of those things. And then the other thing we need to see from this football team too, Vince, is consistency.
Yeah.
That's something we did not see this year. I mean, it's like some weeks I loved the game plans, others I didn't. Some weeks I thought the team came out fired up and ready to play, and some teams they just didn't look. They didn't look. I never really questioned them playing hard, other than the Marshall game. That's the only game that I can think of where I actually questioned whether or not the players were giving effort. I shouldn't say play hard because they didn't play hard against USC on defense, but that was a game plan thing. They gave effort where the effort wasn't there. I think effort is probably a better word here than playing hard.
Yeah.
I thought the effort against like even Stanford, I don't think the effort was the problem. It's just a terrible game plans and terrible execution. And just the team didn't look like they had that thing, but I didn't think it was a effort problem, right? It was another problem. And I think that's another thing too, is people can lazily just every time you don't play well, effort wasn't there. Well, that's not true. The effort was there against USC. The execution wasn't there. The game plan wasn't there. So, but the execution was a problem. Like how many times did we hear Marcus Freeman say that? And every time he did it, it was like, yep, the execution stinks.
Right.
Like, the consistency, like 1 week you come out and you look like you did against North Carolina, and then 2 weeks later, you look like you did against Stanford. How does that happen?
Yeah.
Like, you look like you did running the football against Clemson, and then you can't run the football against Navy, right? Like, what are you doing as a staff that you're not able to make those adjustments? And what are you doing in preparation that your players are not always able to execute? Like some weeks the defense, Vince, looked locked in.
Yeah.
And it was money. And then other weeks you're like, they have no clue what they're doing.
Like Clemson. They were locked in against Clemson.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The gang tackling, the recognition, like they were about as locked in as I've ever seen them against Clemson.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The first half against South Carolina, not so much, not so locked in, but the difference for me was the second half of South Carolina. They were locked in.
Right. And that lack of consistency is a big problem.
Sure.
That Coach Freeman's going to have to be able to say, why? What did we do? Because when you have execution problems like that across the board, that's not a player problem first and foremost. That's a coaching problem first and foremost. And you got to be able to look in the mirror and say, hey, what do we got to do differently? And that's the thing. And don't do the lazy, oh, we lost to Stanford because the players weren't focused and they weren't locked in or they didn't play hard. Well, whose fault is that?
Right.
Right? That's still you. But that's not what the problem was in those games, in my opinion. Did they play as hard as they could have, should have? No. But it wasn't that as much. It was your team wasn't locked in, and the execution was just poor, and you had some bad game plans.
Yeah.
It's like Coach Reese, for example. If you take Tommy Reese's 4 or 5 best game plans this year, and you're like, dude, that's my dude right there. That's what we thought we were going to see, right? Like Clemson, South Carolina, North Carolina were just really USC. I thought with a couple early calls. I mean, there was I didn't like the jet sweep. There's a couple early calls I didn't love, the tight end thing. But other than that, man, the game plan I thought was really good offensively. And then there's games where you're looking at Stanford and you're like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. And you just kind of wonder, man, how do you do that one week and that the next week? Defensively, we'd see that. One week where you're like, man, Al Golden is in this dude's head. For all I know, they accidentally connected the frequency of their headphones, and Al Golden's listening into what they're calling, and he's just that's how in the head he was. And then the next week you're like, why can't this guy stop this mediocre offense?
Right.
And those are things you have to look at from a coaching standpoint and say, why? What did we do as a staff not well that our team didn't have? Is it leadership? Is it how we, so then you go back and you look at your practices. Okay, did we do something different here? Did we not hold them as accountable here? What did we do? And then you say, okay, Marshall, here's what we did. We came out middle of the week and threw out the game plan we were going to use and put in a new one. Dumb. Don't ever freaking do that again.
Right.
Once you get past your first day of practice, you're locked in. You just tweak and you make adjustments, but you don't throw out the run defense game plan and put in a pass defense game plan. That's the NFL crap, right? And then guess what? Well, how'd Marshall beat you? They ran all over you. Simple as that, right? Shocker, because you put in a pass defense game plan. And so those are the things you got to look at and say, yeah, that's on us. And then other times you got to look at it and say, hey, look, we didn't do a good enough job this week of getting our leaders to really push the guys when we were playing this crap team. We've got to do a better job of bringing that out of the leadership, because it can't always be us.
Sure.
That's still on you, but you've got conduits that are now doing it, right? And that's what great leaders do. And I feel like that's something that I think Coach Freeman took for granted, the player leadership this year, because it had been so good in the past. But part of the reason it was so good in the past is because the players knew they needed to do it, because they weren't going to get it from the top.
Because the head coach wasn't around. They had to be leaders.
I think the players at times thought, well, Coach Freeman's got this.
Right.
And that's got to be a thing where okay, yeah, but I still need you to do your job.
It's a good point. I never thought of it that way. That's actually a really, really good point. In the past, they knew they had to do it. Now they figured, well, he's here all the time. He's dapping everybody up. He's leading. Everybody just needs to follow him. Great teams have great player leadership.
Mm-hmm.
The good teams have good leadership from the top. Great teams have good player leadership.
Right.
That's the difference. And that's also part of what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about the heaviness of practice and all of that, right? And moving forward, if the coaching staff takes their foot off the gas, is there going to be the player leadership to bring them back up to where they need to be, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's huge. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see. Are we going to see some of these young guys, some of these true freshmen and sophomores from this year who are going to be sophomores and juniors starting now?
Mm-hmm.
Are they going to be able to take that mantle? Right. I mean, is that the group that we're going to be looking at for leadership? Right. Is it the older kids are
leadership, Vince, right? Isn't that kind of the question? Can he develop leadership?
Yes.
Because you inherited some pretty good leaders.
Absolutely.
Michael Mayer, Jarrett Patterson, even though he had the meltdown against Marshall, still did a lot of good leadership things throughout the year, which is why you kind of threw him out as your best leader. Kind of thing. You look at defensively, there was leadership wasn't as good. I don't think, honestly, to be honest with you, but JD Bertrand's a natural leader. I mean, just a natural leader. But in some other areas, I feel like you've got to figure, okay, what can we do to foster more leadership from a position by position standpoint? Yeah. Some of that is due to youth.
Absolutely.
right? You were just young at that position, and it's hard to get young guys to step up and lead. At other positions, it comes down to, okay, we've got to do more as coaches to foster more leadership from our
Yeah.
group. And that's something that I want to see. Like receiver, that's a big question of receiver, because why? It's not their fault. You lost your leader, and you can only provide so much leadership when you can't play.
Yeah. Agreed.
That's just the reality of it. And so,
Yeah.
can he get who's going? That's a question for me. How will Marcus Freeman, Tommy Reese, and Chancey Stuckey, leadership structure on down, get more leadership from the receiver position? How are they going to create? Because leadership to me is about accountability. That's what boils down to. If leadership isn't creating accountability, then it's not good leadership. Now, there's the leaders. How you go about that leadership is what a lot of people focus on. They will focus on what a guy said and did and all that. And at the end of the day, however, it's about accountability.
Yeah.
If you have accountability, you'll get results. If you don't have accountability, you won't. And that's really what it boils down to.
Pretty simple.
Is that. And so, and accountability is not like this punishment thing. If you do something wrong, you got to run steps. It's more about accountability. Alex Barr said it perfectly. You know what made, and I've heard other Notre Dame players say this, defensive guys will say this, but on the offensive line, Alex Barr would say this. Bars said this on our show and has said this to me in conversations. What made Quentin Nelson a great leader was that he was going to bring it every day. And if you didn't bring it every day, you were going to hear about it. That's accountability. But accountability starts first and foremost by, I'm going to do it this way. That's what made Michael Mayer such a great leader, because you knew he was your dude. If anybody on your team should have the thing to say, hey, I'm going to take today off, it was Michael Mayer, right? But it never happened. It was, I'm bringing it today, and you better bring it with me. There was at tight end, there was that, but that's how Quentin Nelson was. That's what made, Quentin Nelson wasn't given the rah-rah speed. That was Mike McGlinchey's job.
Mm-hmm.
Quentin's job was to set the bar. This is how you prepare every day. And if you don't, you're going to have to answer to my 6'5", 345-pound butt about it. And nobody wanted to do that. Nobody wanted to have, you did not want Quentin Nelson getting in your face, whether you were a defensive player or an offensive line guy. And so eventually got to the point where he didn't need to get in their face. They just knew, let's go. Time to strap it up. Let's follow cue. And that's what made that line so good. I would argue that the talent on the offensive line now at all 5 spots is better than it was then. Especially, but I think that what this group has is that group had the elite player at left guard, but it had great leadership. And it was an older group for the most part. Can this group match that? That's a question mark. I think they will, offensive line wise, but I'm talking about other positions, right? Is going to be the question mark, Vince. And that ultimately is up to the head coach. You've got to create an environment in which leadership is fostered. I think some leaders are born, some are developed. Some guys have leadership traits that you need to bring out of them. Vince, you've dealt with this in coaching high school kids, especially because you're dealing with an even younger group of kids.
Right.
You see kids that maybe he's a little reserved or whatever else, but well, he's too quiet. Yeah, but I see something in that kid that I know he's got it in him. I just got to bring it. I got to create an environment in which he's comfortable doing this, then saying this.
Right.
Right. And sometimes you got to say, hey, dude, I need you to pipe down because you're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk. And until you walk the walk, I don't want to hear crap from you again. Right. That's creating a level of accountability where that kid understands it's not about giving the rah-rah speeches in the locker room when you just half-ass it during practice all day. I don't want to hear it from you. I was literally begging you to give me better effort in practice. I want to hear you doing the rah-rah, what we're going to do this weekend. Right. That's what made Alohi Gilman such a great leader. Yes, he would do all this in the locker room, give the speeches, but you know why players listen to him? Because you knew that dude left everything on the field on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday. You knew it was going to be left on the field. And so you follow that guy.
Yeah.
We'll follow that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what makes a great leader. I don't know if we had enough of that at Notre Dame this year. And that's something the coach would have to create. And that's something we have to find out if Marcus Freeman can create that.
Because I feel like Marcus Freeman is that guy. He is that leader. But can that leader cultivate other leaders?
Yeah.
We'll see. I think so, but we'll see. That's good. That is a question mark moving forward. I think I think Marcus Freeman is cut from the same Alohi Gilman cloth. You know what I mean? He's gonna lead by example. He's gonna lead by his work ethic. You know, all of that. but can he create leaders? Can he foster a good atmosphere for other leaders?
Right.
Where
Because
it's not
a
just
coach
him.
cannot always be that guy. You hear this
Yeah.
all the time, Vince. A coach
Yeah.
cannot always be that guy.
That's
A
fascinating.
coach can't be everywhere. One coach can't be everywhere. That's why it is
Yeah.
important to have leadership with your assistant coaches.
Yes.
It's important to have leadership from a coordinator standpoint on all three phases of the game. It's all of that's important. But at the end of the day, nobody is around players more than other players.
Right.
Do you have that guy? Here's leadership. Do you have that guy? And I'm going to get a little bit. People may not like this example, but this is an example of it. I'm not saying this did or didn't happen under Notre Dame. Do you have that guy on your team that sees a kid at a party, drunk with a drunk girl? Do you have the leadership say, pull your buddy out of that scenario, right? That's leadership. A kid's about to partake in something that he shouldn't be partaking in. Leadership is also pound on the door saying, nuh-uh, I heard what you're going to do. Bull crap. It's done. You're not doing that crap. Going into a kid's dorm room who's been whining in the locker room about how he's not happy. And you go to his dorm room and you say, hey, look, man, or you go to his house, hey, look, man, if you're not happy, leave. I'm not going to have you in the locker room complaining and like those are things about leadership too that are not easy things to do to their peers for 20 somethings to do to their peers. It's to pull a guy out of a bad spot with a female where he's not technically doing anything wrong from the perception of college life standpoint, but as a college athlete, that's not a good idea for you to be in that situation, right? You're about to do this. Hey man, I'm just enjoying college life. No. You're a Notre Dame football player. You're gonna be smarter than that. That's leadership too. And those are aspects of it that we need to find out if Notre Dame has. And can Marcus Freeman create that environment where that leadership is appreciated and accepted and encouraged? Those are all very important things that I want to see from this football team, right? And so we're going to find out if he can do that. Yeah. And honestly, Vince, that would be true no matter how this year went. It's kind of like the development piece. It's kind of like, well, yeah, we were going to have this question no matter what they did this year because you inherited a certain aspects of this program. You've now got to show that you can do it down the road.
Right.
And those are going to be important pieces to it, in my opinion. And then the last thing for me, Vince, is while the bowl game was a good step in the right direction, one of the things this coaching staff was not good at on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, in-game adjustments.
Yeah.
In-game adjustments this year were a problem.
And that's what I was hoping would be a strength with Al Golden coming in, to be honest with you. Because that's like one of the first things he talked about was how being in the NFL showed him how to make in-game adjustments and all of these. Like that was like one of his main talking points. I was like, okay, let's go. Like this is what we've been waiting for. I'm still waiting for it. That's right. After 13 games, I'm still waiting for it.
Now, positive sign from the bowl game. Right. I thought they made good in-game adjustments.
Agreed.
But now we've got to see it on a more consistent basis.
Yes.
That's the final piece for me, Vince, is and there's always going to be there's always other things about, looking at different aspects of, okay, when he loses good coaches, can he replace them with equally good coach? But you'll never know that stuff until you're put in that situation.
Right. For sure.
And so those are all things that we'll have to learn. If Harry Heastan retires in 3 years after winning two more Joe Moore awards, will he be able to find someone that can continue the tradition that was established or not? Those are for any coach.
Right.
And every coach is going to have his misses. Nick Saban still has made some horrible hires, but you make the changes.
And he makes the changes. I mean, he'll make those changes.
Yep. And that's what you need to see. That's what I want to see. So I'm excited to see how that develops.
Yeah. And
those are all things.
And again, that's just a time thing. We're not saying that that's a good or a bad thing right now. I didn't see enough of it this year, but with a year under his belt, with a year with the coordinators under his belt, with him being the head coach, do we see that?
Right.
Hope so. I really do. I hope so, because they need it. That it's just one thing they were just not very good at. And I would actually say poor. It was rough.
Yeah.
My watch is talking to me.
All good there. So I think the thing is for me, Vince, end of the day, as we wrap it all up, some of the very important things that we needed to see that I was most uncertain of, we saw this year, which is good. The self-awareness, the toughness aspects of it, but then also the thing about handling adversity.
Yeah.
I didn't want us to have to see that. It's not a lesson I wanted Notre Dame to learn this year, to be honest with you.
That's fair.
But that was probably the most encouraging thing, and every bit as important, if not more so, than some of those other things, because it's easy to, be a leader when things are going well. No one heard about issues in the University of Miami football program, and they were, Larry Coker had them as like two of the best teams in his college football history. But then as soon as they started losing, I mean, you saw that it was all it was all like it was a house made out of sand, right? It wasn't going to last.
Right.
And as soon as adversity hits, it crumbled.
Yeah.
And those are the things you need to see. And so I feel like with what Marcus Freeman showed this year, that being a strength of the program moving forward, if at Notre Dame especially, is so important. So important. And I will give Brian Kelly credit for this. I felt like that was something that Notre Dame had always done well under Kelly, with the exception of 2014. This team, I felt, for the most part, responded well to adversity to certain degrees on the field, right? But he was a guy that had been coaching 20 years by the time he showed up at Notre Dame. Right. So to see Marcus Freeman do that in year one, I liked. I was very pleased by, and that was one of the greatest unknowns of, hey, how does a coach going to handle this when things don't go well? How's Marcus Freeman going to handle it when the players aren't cheering for him and loving on him and thinking he's the greatest like they did when he's hired? How is he going to handle that?
Yeah,
because that goes away. That goes away.
Yeah.
And to see how they handled it and how they rallied, like that was big for me. Because you don't become the guy you love when you have to start making tough decisions about benching guys or encouraging guys to transfer, or do all these other things. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, yeah, I don't love you anymore. That's part of the deal, right? It's part of the deal. I loved you when you were starting me, but my love is conditional on you still starting me. You know what I mean? That's cool. That's cool.
Sound like my kids.
Yeah, I know, right? But that's a key, and that's something we learned. So
yeah.
So we're going to move on to the mailbag next, Vince. But before we do, folks, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Please give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast app, and sign up for the CFB Nation app. And of course, Vince, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot of the questions people are asking in the chat, if you were on the message board, you already know the answer to that.
You already have it, man.
You already know it. You already know it.
Now. Come on, folks.
It's mailbag time, Vince. So let's dive into the mailbag. And we've got a lot of questions here that we're going to work through. We have a super chat here from Nick P. starting the Vince Special Teams Breakdown Fund. So that's on you, Vince. It's on you. You gotta get it going.
Apparently.
John A1 asked the question, and it's really not, we don't really have an answer for it, John, because we've got to see. But he says, does Marcus Freeman recognize the linebacker play as a problem? I will say this, I don't think that we can know that from Marcus Freeman's very truthful, but at the same time, he's also very good at only saying what the positives on certain things. If you listen to how he talks about the linebackers publicly, you're concerned that he doesn't see what we see. But that doesn't mean he doesn't see what we see. He's just focusing on the positives of those players because he wants to build them up. I don't know the answer to that. I hope he does. I really hope he does. I hope he sees it as a problem.
I mean, I don't want to read too much into it because it is a bowl game. And generally in bowl games, you try to get more guys playing time. But there was more playing time for other linebackers in the bowl game than there was throughout the season.
Sure.
Is that just because it was a bowl game? Or is that because, hey, it's time to get these guys some reps? You know what I mean? So you could look at it both ways. I could make an argument both ways. Like if this was a topic in a debate, I could take either side and sound legit and be successful. You know what I mean? So we'll see. The proof's in the pudding, right? I would be lying if I said I wasn't excited to see a couple of spring practices to see who's getting reps and where those reps are coming from. And I realize that's not the be all end all, but at the same time, it might give us a peek into where they are with that position and other positions as well, but that one specifically.
Let's go to the next one here, and that is from John Malone. John Malone says, what have you guys heard or observed about Freeman's ability, willingness to make tough decisions regarding staff changes when needed? I mean, here's the one thing that I'll say. Nothing. He just does it. And that was kind of something that was somewhat encouraging for me last year. I was very nervous that he was going to keep Del Alexander.
Me too.
Because we just kept hearing nothing. Like, we all knew Jeff Quinn was going to be gone. Like, that
Correct.
Got leaked. But like,
Early.
we didn't know what was going to happen with Mike Elston.
Yeah.
We didn't know what was going to happen with Del Alexander, some other guys. He just happened, right? It just, as soon as the game was over, it came out, because I think Coach Freeman doesn't really tell a lot of people that kind of stuff. And so he just kind of does it. And so I honestly don't know. I don't know. We're just gonna have to see, right? The evidence is going to be by what happens. I mean, let's see what happens when these kids get to campus, and if there's changes and we're hearing anything different, because as of right now, he hasn't done anything different. But the bowl game ended 5 days ago, right? It takes some time to kind of think about what you're going to do and have those conversations. And you've got to get your players set up for getting back on campus, which happens in like 11, 12 days. I mean, there's a lot going on. And so a lot of the conversations are going to be focused on that. So Vince, I don't know. I just know that he just made the moves. There wasn't all this lead in, and it just made the moves. I would prefer it be that way. I hate when there's a bunch of leaks about this guy's going to be fired. That guy, just make the move, right? And if that means that a guy took another job, just make the move.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how I hope it'll be. But honestly, John, I can't tell you that I know confidently that what he will or won't do. And that's kind of why I brought it up, because I haven't heard a lot about it. So either A, he doesn't think it's a problem, or B, he's very good at keeping his opinions on that close to the vest, and only telling people he really trusts that aren't going to then go blab to, the media and other people like that. So, I mean, when it comes to like people getting fired and stuff, that should not be something that should be getting leaked out a lot, in my opinion.
Agreed. And I'm hoping it's the latter of the two as well.
Anthony Solomon says, if Jim Leonard called you and said he wanted to be the next defensive coordinator, would you make the change? I'm going to say something a little bit out there that a lot of people aren't going to agree with. I think Jim Leonard's a very good defensive coordinator. I don't know if he's at the top of my list of guys that I would want to bring in to replace Al Golden if that was a need. I don't even think he's the best guy in the Big Ten West that I would go after. I mean, you look at the job that Joe Rossi has done the last couple of years at Minnesota since he took over. I mean, that's pretty impressive, Vince. And with all due respect, they were a better defense the last 2 years than Wisconsin was, if we're going to be completely honest about it. And he inherited a defense that was pretty bad before, and, he took over in 2019 as the defensive coordinator. In 2018, they gave up 26.5 points per game. Then they were 22.5 and then 30.1. But as it kind of got more to his scheme, they were 17.3 in 2021, and they were 13.8 this past season. So you look at it and say, but here's the difference. Here's my big concern about Jim Leonard. A lot of things that I've heard about Jim Leonard as a coach, doesn't like to recruit. And I cannot, that concerns the heck out of me, because that tells me I think he's a really good defensive coordinator. But the thing about Joe Rossi is he's also a really good defensive coordinator, but he's also a guy that will recruit. And that's my thing, is I need a guy that will recruit and coach at a high level. So if Al Golden leaves and they hire Jim Leonard, am I happy? Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy. Jim Leonard's a darn good defensive coordinator. I'm just saying, if I had my choice of would he be my number one guy? Probably not. But if he was the defensive coordinator in Notre Dame, would I be happy? Yeah, be happy. I think he's a very good defensive coordinator. Then you'd have to say, hey, you're going to rely on Marcus Freeman to be the recruiter. Okay, fine, whatever. But that's kind of where I'm at with that one, Vince.
So the key to what you just said, though, is if you were making a change with Al Golden.
Right. Just because the question was asked. I mean,
no. That's what I'm saying. But that's the difference, because the question is being asked that if he called, are you just going to fire Al Golden, get rid of him for Jim Leonard?
Right.
That would be, and if you just take the names out of it, that'd be real tough for me if I wasn't already thinking about making a change.
That's the tough. Well, I think that's the thing, though, is if the Notre Dame defense was phenomenal this year, we're not asking this question. The only reason this question is getting asked is because the defense wasn't as good as it needed to be.
I get that.
Right.
But I just don't. I'm not. Number one, I'm not giving that kind of power to a guy who just calls me up and says, I want to be there. And I think it's just a premise. It's just a premise of, if there was interest there, would you go hire a guy? Look, I think you need to be able to make those kind of choices, Vince. I'm sorry. I think you need to. If you are a team that's trying to compete for championships,
and you know that you can go get a coach that is a very clear upgrade, you do it at the player level all the time. I mean, if you've got a quarterback who's a 2-year starter and, let's just, okay, so you love Ian Book, right? Okay, and Ian Book's, all the things people say about him, multi-year starter. All of a sudden, 2020, Mac Jones calls and says, I want to transfer to Notre Dame. You're telling me you don't say, yeah, okay, cool. And Ian Book gets benched? Of course you'd make that move. Why wouldn't we do that with coaches?
That's the difference. Getting benched and getting fired are two different things.
Well, but that's what you got. It's not for Ian Book. It wouldn't feel any different.
Well, I'm just saying.
But the guy can go coach somewhere else.
Different to me. It's different to me.
The guy's got to go coach somewhere else. I mean, I see where you're coming from because you're coming from as a coach, and I understand all that. But that's the decision you have to make as a head coach, right? I mean, if you know, hey, if I can bring in this guy, and this is going to make us a much better. But see, here's the thing: it have to be that. It can't just be a slight upgrade.
Right.
It's got to be like you're going from this guy who's okay to this guy who's elite, proven elite. That's a difference. Thank you. For me, Vince, it's got to be that.
I get that. I would already have to be thinking about making.
We said you've got but again,
that's how it
we're
is for
only
me.
Thinking about that. If Al Golden's defense was ranked in the top 10 this year in scoring and yards, we're not having this conversation, right? So I mean, yeah, it's not even about thinking to make a change. You've got to be thinking that I'm not pleased with what I'm seeing.
Sure.
And then your thought is, okay, we're going to make these changes. We're going to do all this, but I'm not happy with what I just saw. I'm not. If you think, man, we got a great defensive situation and a guy who's an upgrade, but not a huge upgrade calls, because here's the thing. If Al Golden's defense was to the level of past Notre Dame defenses, I don't know how much of an upgrade Jim Leonhard would be. But what we saw this year, to me, it's a pretty significant upgrade. He had a much better defense than Notre Dame this year with not even close to the same talent, in my opinion. Now, here's the rub. Is Wisconsin really that good defensively, or is it because they play in a league with crap offenses? That's the same concern with Joe Rossi. Outside of Ohio State, was there really any good offenses in the Big Ten this year? Michigan, to a degree. Penn State, sort of. It's not a good offensive league. Now, you have a top 2 defense in the Big 12. That tells me something. You know what I mean? But in the Big 12, it's kind of like, I'm not sure. But to your point, Vince, if Al Golden was putting a great defense on the field, you don't field that question. But that's not the reality, right? Of what this of how this question is being asked. The reality of what this question being asked is that the defense wasn't as good as it should have been this year, right? Same thing on offense. I mean, if a certain guy calls and you're like, boy, this guy's awesome. Yeah, you got to consider making that move. I believe at the coordinator level, especially. I do. Next question here from John A1. If Notre Dame didn't land a transfer quarterback, could Minchie be ready to contribute 6 games into the season? John, that's a really hard question to answer. Let me see him in the spring first. I mean, this is a kid who only played half a senior year, Vince. I mean, he's very talented, but projecting a quarterback to be ready to play as a freshman is a very hard thing to do. Let me see him in the spring, John. Ask me this question in May. I want to see what he looks like in May.
I still need a 4th quarterback, though. I still need a 4th quarterback in the room.
That's fine,
regardless of whether
that's fine.
Minchie's ready or not.
Sure, that's fine. But he's saying if Notre Dame doesn't land a transfer, not that if he's ready, do you not take a transfer? Of course. But he's saying, what if they don't? What if they don't get a transfer? Can Minchie be ready to play? Is the question.
It's possible. But they're going to land a transfer. Now, and I'm not saying it. What I'm saying is they need another body in that room because they can't go into the season with 3 quarterbacks.
I don't disagree, and John doesn't disagree. It's just more of looking at it from the standpoint of, but what if they don't get that guy? Because you always say, I want to do A, B, and C, and D.
But I don't see that being a reality.
Okay, but it is right now. And so he asked the question, so I'm going to honor the question, right? Could he be ready by 6 games? That's tough. But the problem is, Vince, is even with the answer, it speaks to why you need another quarterback. The answer speaks to why you need another quarterback, because I don't know if Kenny Minchie should be ready by game 6. And I don't necessarily want to put my championship aspirations on the shoulders of a freshman whose name is not Trevor Lawrence.
Not a chance.
Right? And so that's why there is the need there. And that's why it's not an ideal situation to miss on a transfer quarterback.
Right.
because you have a starting quarterback in right now in Tyler Buckner, who's immensely talented, but he's also played 3 college games as a starter, and in 5 years has had 1 full healthy season of football. 1 in 5 years. You can't just assume he's going to be good now. Can't.
Agreed.
All right, next question is Irish812. How beneficial do you think it was for Buckner to spend the season in the booth with Coach Reese and see plays develop through his eyes? I think it's huge.
It was 100%. He was just from the way he carried himself on the field during that game was completely different than it was the first game and a half that he had this year. And I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact that he was able to sit, listen, and learn during the games and during practice from a different point of view. He never once looked rattled to me. Not one time.
Vince, let me ask you this. If you saw this the way that I saw it. Watching it from the stands, for press box, I saw this. But then I also, when I went and watched the TV copy the other night, I saw it again. You look at his body language after mistakes, to your point, was immensely different. When he would make mistakes against Marshall, he would kind of have this look of like, I don't know what just happened.
Yes.
Now,
Agreed.
that goes away with experience. He didn't get any experience.
Right. His experience was sitting in the booth.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And so I think like even the interception, like you go look at the exchange on the TV copy between him and Marcus Freeman after the 3rd interception. You can hear him. You can see this look on his face. Yeah, I know. I knew what I should have done. I just didn't do it. That's the sign of a guy that won't make that mistake again.
Right.
Because he can immediately grasp before being told by the coach what I did wrong. He didn't have those reactions against Ohio State and against Marshall. He had like this, what happened? And I think seeing the entire offense being played out, seeing how defenses react, seeing how to process reads, seeing Drew not make the right decisions, seeing Drew making the right decisions, all of it. So like Tyler will see in the box what we saw. Dude, why didn't he throw that check down? Did you know how wide open Audric or Tyree wasn't that play? Doesn't mean he would have seen it if he was still the quarterback.
Right.
But now in your head, that is there in your head, which is why you watch film.
Yeah, right.
Because in film, you can see the big picture view and you now know, hey, I know I can't see it, but I know it's there.
Right.
Because I know what the call is and I see that guy. So I know if that guy's there, he can't be over here. I don't see my running back, but I know he's going to be there. The throw he made to Braden Lindsey, to me, was a great example of that, Vince. You know where he is. You know where he needs to get to. Throw the ball there. Tyler Buckner doesn't make that throw in week 2.
Yes.
He doesn't.
Agreed.
I mean, think about the throw to Braden Lindsey he missed. It's wide open Braden Lindsey. Whiffed on it.
In the Marshall game.
Yeah. What should have been an 80-yard touchdown. Just missed it.
Yep.
This game, however, he's like just throwing it out there with touch, letting Braden – because what did we say? He didn't put any touch on that ball.
Right. He just zinged it out there.
Right.
Yeah.
This was a kid who mentally showed a much more firm grasp of what he was seeing, even when he made mistakes in real time.
Right.
And that's why there's hope that, hey, eventually he starts eliminating some of those mistakes. Because that's the other big thing is he's got to eliminate those mistakes, Vince.
Right.
Like he can't keep making those same mistakes.
Agreed.
John A1 asks, is Al Golden always going to lean towards his 2-gap tendencies? How does Coach Freeman ensure his sound aggressive philosophy is reestablished? So what we've talked about on the show, Vince, is that Notre Dame used its defensive line too much to be gap eaters, even though they don't have the personnel for that.
Yeah, they don't have the personnel for that.
Yeah, and that's where the question comes from.
So, I mean, you're the head coach. If that's the kind of if you want to let Al Golden run his defense, then that's on you. If you want him to run what you want him to run, then that's on you too. I mean, that's the be all end all for me. If Marcus Freeman wants something, then he doesn't need to ensure it. He just needs to tell him, like, dude, this is what we're doing. So it really just depends to me what Marcus Freeman wants this defense to be.
Right.
Does he want it to be a 2-gap technique team, or does he want it to be more like what he ran? When Al Golden got the job, Marcus Freeman was very clear that he was going to let Al Golden run the defense. Right. Now, he's had a year of Al Golden's defense. Does that change moving forward?
Right.
I think we're all interested to see the answer to that question. But the how does he ensure it? he tells him to do it. Like, that's how you ensure it. That's how we talk about leadership, right? You have to be a leader to your coaches. That's how you are a leader to your coaches.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I also think that you mentioned something there, and Vince, and there's a comment in the chat too, is like, I was not pleased with the job Al Golden did this year. But I also feel like this is also a guy that we had mentioned has not been a coordinator for a while. What kind of growing pains would there be? That's what we need to see next is like, does he have the thought of, okay, next year we're going to keep doing the same thing and the guys will be better at it because they know the system?
Right.
Or does he say, yeah, they're going to know the system better, but I also need to make sure that I'm making changes as well? That's my concern because I don't know Al Golden that way. I've met him several times, in the coaching stuff, and he's always been a very pleasant guy, very nice guy. I've always respected him as a person. He was not one of those guys with like big time other coaches and stuff like that. He's always a decent man from any interaction I've ever had with him. But as a coach, I was not pleased with the job he did this year because it felt like too many times it was, okay, the players aren't getting the job done. The scheme is sound, but the players aren't getting the job done. And I hope that that's something we don't see moving forward. I hope that he adapts. Is like, hey, I'm in college now. I gotta get back to being more of a college coach. That's my hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to really come down to what are his long-term aspirations. If he wants to get back to the NFL, then he's not going to change. If he wants to stay in college, even as a head coach, then that'll change. And I think that just comes back to where his heart is, to be completely honest with you, Vince.
Yes.
Right? Because you're not going to, your goal is to get to a level where you need to show that complexity to get back there.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of it. Next question. David Lowe. Man, David, you just got to work. It's the lack of positivity, man, is kind of sad sometimes. What do you think is a realistic expectation for Freeman in 23, considering we play Clemson, Ohio State, and USC back-to-back weeks and then have 24 with A&M, USC, and Florida State? Number one, they don't play Clemson, Ohio State, and USC in back-to-back weeks. All right, I've explained this. If you look at the schedule that we put on the site, they have Ohio State, USC, then Wake Forest, then Clemson. But there's a week in there. There's the Ohio State and USC are not back-to-back. They're listed back-to-back on the schedule now because 4 games will be determined.
Right.
They play Ohio State on September 23rd. They don't play USC till October 14th.
Right.
They're not going to have 2 bye weeks between that game.
Correct.
There's going to be 1 or 2 teams put in between there. They play USC on the 14th of October. They don't play Clemson until November 4th. It's just that there's 4 games and byes that have to be inserted somewhere into the schedule. So they don't play any of those teams back-to-back. So what are my expectations? Same as this year, to be going in November with a chance to compete for a championship. I mean, 11-1 against that schedule most likely has you with a pretty good shot to get into the playoff. The expectations are playoff, and that's realistic. I hate when people put, what are your realistic expectations, as if we're going to give you an unrealistic expectation. Right. Tell you like 12-0 and win by 50 every game by 50. That's the expectation. What other expectation would I give you, David, other than a realistic one? You may not agree with it, but it may be unrealistic to you, but it's how I think and feel. I'm never going to tell you guys something that I don't believe. And if I do tell you something that I think should happen compared to what I think will happen, I'll tell you. I'll say, hey, look, this team should go 11-1, but based on A, B, C, and D, I think 9-3 is the best they're going to do. Or when we do game predictions, Vince will say, look, this is what I think should happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but something should happen.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no reason for me to think that 11-1 is not realistic next year.
Right.
I mean, look, USC is the only one of those 3 teams that outplayed Notre Dame this year for 4 quarters. Notre Dame led Ohio State longer than Ohio State led Notre Dame when they played in Columbus. Right? And so in Marcus Freeman's first game, and that was with C.J. Stroud and with some of the guys that they're going to be losing next year. So is Ohio State still going to be really good? Yeah, they're going to be really good, but I think so is Notre Dame. And the other thing too is they get 2 of those 3 teams at home.
Right.
And why is A&M on this in this conversation?
Seriously. The team that's the only thing that they're leading is the number of kids in the transfer portal.
Seriously. Seriously.
What are we worried about?
I don't get that one. I don't get that one at all. But, look, USC is going to be good, but USC in 24 is not going to have Caleb Williams.
Right.
Oh, they'll get a transfer guy. Yeah, okay, fine. I'm pretty sure that transfer guy won't be as good as Caleb Williams because that guy just won the Heisman Trophy.
Correct.
So, but look, USC is going to be very good again next year. Notre Dame gets them at home. And Notre Dame was 2 just dumb turnovers away from being in that game, if not winning that game. You know what I mean? So at USC, and Notre Dame just curb stomped Clemson this year. So why would I think that Notre Dame can't realistically go 2-1 against those teams?
Right.
You know, and they did that, Vince, while 2 of the 3 games were on the road. Well, next year's the exact opposite. 2 of the 3 at home. So I guess I just don't. I think it's very realistic to think this team could be an 11-1 team. And if you catch some to go undefeated, you need to catch some breaks.
No doubt.
In my opinion, you need to catch some breaks. And like Michigan this year, caught some breaks. What were their breaks? They played a really, really weak schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay.
They definitely got some breaks in the Illinois game.
Yeah, Georgia had caught some breaks with some plays that went their way, and Missouri and some other games, and their schedule wasn't as tough outside of a couple games. You know, but then there's other teams that, you know, Ohio State caught a break. What was their break? The fact that USC and Clemson choked away. I mean, otherwise Ohio State's not in the playoff, right?
Correct.
So you always need some help or some breaks and things. And sometimes the breaks aren't things you do. It's somebody else losing. You know, Alabama caught some breaks to win a title in 2012. What were the breaks they caught? Oregon and Kansas State both lost.
Mm-hmm.
If those teams don't both lose, guess what? Notre Dame's playing one of those 2 teams for a championship in 2012. So there's some of that stuff. But yeah, I think 11-1, based on what we know of the teams now, is certainly realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also kind of early, because who's USC going to get in the portal? Who's Ohio State going to get in the portal? Who might they lose in the portal? All those teams. Who might Notre Dame lose in the portal? Who might Notre Dame gain in the portal?
There's a lot to happen.
There's a lot that has to happen
now and then, man. Yeah. A ton.
Absolutely. All right, here we go. John A1. Were you surprised we didn't see much of Josh Burnham in the bowl game? Is he just as far from the field as Byron Ford? Josh had surgery on his wrist after the season and before the bowl game.
Yeah.
So he didn't get as much prep time as would have hoped. But I will tell you this. The Notre Dame coaching staff is incredibly high on Josh Burnham. There's a reason, and the reasons are Josh Burnham and Aiden Gobira. Those are the reasons that Notre Dame did not really go hard after any portal guys. I mean, not portal guys, high school kids at Viper. Saying, after you lost Keon, why didn't you go out? You go after Keon because Keon's the best player in high school football. That's why you go after Keon. 100%. I don't care if you were loaded at Viper.
Doesn't matter.
None of them are as good as Keon.
Doesn't matter.
But after that, it's kind of like, and we always said that Keon could eventually also grow into a big end in the right defense. Not the way they do it now, but if you have more of a true 4-down defense where both ends rush. But the reason there's 2 reasons they didn't go after more Vipers in high school. One is it wasn't a great Viper class. Number 2 is because there's a lot of confidence that they've got kids on campus already that can play that position at a high level. Josh Burnham is one of those guys. We've even heard from recruits that the coaches sell them on Josh Burnham and how good they think he's going to be. So I've heard great things about him. But the reason he didn't play primarily was just the injury.
Right, and that's what I had heard.
And the time he missed. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Irish Blooded, do you think there's too much noise for the linebacker group that held them back between the head coach being an excellent LB coach and the current DC being an LB coach and then having an assistant coach, referring to James Laurinaitis? It's a good question, Vince.
Too much noise?
Meaning like there's too many voices.
Oh,
I think is what he means.
See. Okay, that. I got you. Maybe. I mean, that's definitely a theory without being there on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that's
because didn't we always talk about that with quarterbacks, Vince?
Yeah,
in the past?
We talk about that all the time. So, I mean, that's absolutely a theory, one that I have no problem subscribing to based on the outcome of what we saw on the field. Because going into it, you're like, man, the linebackers are going to be on point because of the 3 voices that were going to be in the room. There's a fine line there, though. And could there have been too many? Absolutely. And you've got 2 of the 3 guys that are those voices haven't ever or haven't recently coached in college football. Playing linebacker in college is a lot different than playing linebacker in the NFL. It just is. And so could there have been just a little bit too much? Yeah, that's absolutely a possibility. No doubt about it.
This comment right here from Charles Drury. Tweeting right now. Driscoll says Notre Dame's going 12-0 and winning every game by 50. I hate you so much right now. All love. Well played, Charles. Very well played. Very well played. Nate, this was funny. He put this comment up. Nathan Lytle, this is during the show he put up. I was late to the party, so I'm catching up at it with 2 times speed, and let me tell you what I now know. What Brian and Vince would sound like after a Mountain Dew bender. Not wrong.
Just go.
Yeah, he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Oh, I don't know if I'd want to hear us at 2 times the speed. That could be bad.
Not at all. Ant VR says, let's say things play out and Sam Hartman starts in 23. What's the likely outcome for 24 if Buckner stays? Does Minchie sit the bench as a sophomore? With that trajectory, Carr may not play until 2027. Well, there's a lot of leaps there, I think. I like the premise. So let's work with the premise that Sam Hartman comes and starts in 2023 and Tyler Buckner stays, which I hope he does and think that he will.
Yep.
I think Tyler Buckner's your starting quarterback in 2024 unless he gets injured.
Agreed.
And then you kind of look at it and, does he come back for a 5th year and start a 2nd year? Probably. But now you kind of get into where now you go into 2026 and it's CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie battling it out. I don't think it's a given that Kenny Minchie is going to beat out CJ Carr, first of all.
Right.
So, it could be Kenny Minchie that's never the starter at Notre Dame. That could be it. That happens, right? Joe Burrow got beat out at Ohio State. People say, well, what kind of mistake that would? No, because at that time, Dwayne Haskins was the better player at that time, right? Joe Burrow eventually got his chance, but at that time, 2018, who was the better player, Vince? It was Dwayne Haskins.
Right.
Who wasn't exactly a bum. I mean, the guy was a first-round draft pick and, broke every single Ohio State passing record that 1 year as a starter. You know what I mean? So it happens. And that's where you want to be, right? You want to be in a battle where a kid like Kenny Minchie may not start. But I think if in an ideal world, for me, Buckner sits for a year, works on his mechanics, works on just more of the mental game, because what got him in trouble against it was still just some of the processing, that needs to get sped up, but that comes from time. But the mechanics are still a hot mess. The overall mechanics are still a hot mess. Just kind of developing some of that. You sit, and then you got 2 years left to still start. I would hope that he would take both of those.
Yeah.
That would, to me, be a perfect world scenario. And then you let CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie battle it out in 2026.
Yep. I agree with you on that being the best case scenario. And I'll add to the fact that I would also like to see Tyler play a little bit next year as well. Whether it's a package, whether it's whatever, I want him to play similar to what it was with Jack Cohn's situation.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And the first thing I would say is I'm sitting down with Sam Hartman, and if he wins that job, I'm saying, listen, Sam, here's the deal.
Yeah.
Anytime we get a lead on somebody, you're coming out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number one, we need to keep you healthy. But Sam Hartman doesn't need to go to Notre Dame and put up monster numbers to attract the NFL. He needs to show that he can run an NFL offense.
Correct.
And he will. I mean, we've heard NFL coaches talk about one of the reasons they value Notre Dame players. Like what Sean McVay's talked about this with Kyron Williams. He's like, they run an offense that's really similar to ours. You know what I mean? The team that just won the Super Bowl, right? Which is a good and a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I know, right?
But the point is that if you go to Notre Dame and you thrive as a quarterback, you're going to get drafted high. Look at Ian Book. Ian Book wasn't that good about college quarterback. I don't care what anybody says. He wasn't. He managed the offense. That's it. They're going to ask Sam Hartman to do a lot more than they ask Ian Book to do as a thrower. If he comes.
No doubt.
No doubt. And so, you play 3.5 quarters early. Look, against Navy, give Tyler the last quarter and a half. You're up 35-7. Let him play. Let's talk about Tennessee State. Let's talk about Central Michigan. Those first 3 games are games where you can get Tyler a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then you get into some games where it's like, you're blowing a team out, or hey, is there a package? So do you still have Tyler doing what he did with Jack Cohn? Is there that running package? That's something that I think would be worth debating. Do you want him doing that, or do you want him really focusing on developing himself as a passer? I would say do both.
Yeah.
Let him do that, and be more willing to throw out of those packages. We're going to come out at certain times in the game. The danger, though, Vince, is do you lose momentum with your starter?
Sure, I get that. It's a fine line.
That's a fair question.
It's a fine line, and I am not generally a proponent of 2 quarterback system. Right. I mean, I'm just generally not.
Right.
It can work if done correctly. And we'll see. I mean, you've got two differing styles at quarterback, and so it can potentially work, but you've got to be careful.
Right.
You do have to be careful.
Yeah. Next question is John A1 asks, if Notre Dame lands Sam Hartman, how does that impact the Notre Dame run game? I think it helps it in a very similar fashion to the way that having Tyler Buckner helped it. It just is going to be different. And what I mean by that is, number one, Notre Dame is not going to run that mesh. I can assure you of that. They're not going to run that mesh. And if they did, Sam Hartman wouldn't come here.
No.
Why do you think he's leaving Wake Forest?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? A place where he's thrown almost 80 touchdowns the last 2 years. It's not because he thinks he needs more exposure. He plays in the ACC. Right? The ACC just produced the number one quarterback to be picked in the draft a couple years ago. They have a guy in Drake May.
The records.
Right. They had a guy in Drake May that if he doesn't falter down the stretch, his team doesn't falter down the stretch, is going to be in New York.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no problem with exposure in the ACC for quarterbacks. None. Right. NC State just had Ryan Finley get picked in the first, third round a couple years ago by the Bengals. There's no problem exposure in the ACC for quarterbacks. The problem is this offense is not one that's conducive to developing me to be an NFL quarterback.
Right.
And one where I'm taking twice as many unnecessary hits as I otherwise would in a normal offense. He wants to run a different kind of offense. And that offense raises a lot of questions that I had about Sam Hartman early on.
Sure.
When I would watch him, like, I don't like that guy. Very low completion percentage relative to what you'd think a guy like him would be. Right. He's been in the 50s his whole career. I think this past year was his first year in the 60s.
Like 62 or 63 this year. Yeah.
And then, that concern when you're just looking at numbers, he was 63.1 this year.
There you go.
You look at some of the turnovers. He's thrown 26 interceptions the last 2 years.
Yep.
That's problematic for me. And then you break down the film, and you're like, oh, I get it. It's the offense. They're asking him to make a ton of throws with dudes in his face. They're asking him to make a ton of throws at the line of scrimmage, because they do that stupid slow mesh, which walks him down near the line, and then he's got to throw a corner route.
Right.
And you're shocked that he's not like pinpoint every single time. So what I had to do, Vince, because as you know, I was not on the Sam Hartman train at first. He was not in my top 5. You know this. And I told plenty of people this. And then I said, okay, but let me go look. He's a legit option now. Let me go look at the film. And then I had somebody that I trust told me, it's like, basically like, watch this third down film. Because when they go third down, they don't do the mesh. They do more of a drop backs up. And then you start looking at that and you're like, this kid shows great anticipation, great ball placement in those pure drop backs. He throws a great deep ball. When this kid is allowed to play in a system that is more conducive to being a drop back quarterback, he looks a lot more like a natural quarterback.
Right.
And you start saying, like, okay, wow, how does that then translate to what Notre Dame does? And those are things you have to ask yourself. You're like, okay, yeah, I get it now. I understand it now. And you start to feel like it would translate a lot better. Now, what does that mean for Notre Dame's run game, to the original question? Do you want to add anything to that, Vince, before I kind of circle back to the question?
I'm with you 100%.
You're circling back to the question is, like, look, Sam Hartman as a more traditional quarterback is going to have opportunities to help do more RPOs. Some of the stuff, like there's a lot of things that we saw Tyler Buckner do with the pulls and stuff like that, Vince, is stuff that Sam Hartman will be able to do because of the offense he came from. The play action game will still be good, which then makes teams have to respect the run. You can't just dive your 2 safeties down hard because Notre Dame's guards blocking the A gap. Because if it's a play action pass, he can throw it over your head. He's surprisingly good deep ball thrower. I was very surprised by how good he is throwing the deep ball. He doesn't have a cannon, but his anticipation and timing and accuracy when he drops back and throws the vertical game, his back shoulder throws are really good.
He's really good at that. That's one of the things he does best, actually. Yeah.
So you look at those 2 things, Vince, and you're like, okay, you see those two things. That helps the pass. That helps the run game. And he's mobile. I mean, he can like some of the stuff that Tyler Buckner does, he's not going to be able to do. But like
they're not the same athlete.
Right. But like the pulling the ball on the inside zone and then getting outside and running for 21 yards because the outside is secured and you've got pull. He can do that. Right. You can do read zone stuff with him. You're just not going to do it to the volume that you do with Tyler Buckner. But what you should then do is you should then ramp up the amount of the other stuff you do, right? The RPOs ramp up. Those type of things ramp up. Because let me give you a stat, Vince, about you want to know like why the completion percentage is a little bit lower than it is for some other players. Is this year Sam Hartman threw, his total number of throws, he threw 430 passes. This is according to Pro Football Focus, right? CJ Stroud threw 390. So if you look at it over the course of the season, Sam Hartman in 13 games attempted 215 passes beyond 10 yards. He threw 122 from the 10 to 19 range and 93 deep balls. CJ Stroud this year in 14 games. No, he also played 13 games, so he actually same number. He actually threw 116 passes between the 19 compared to 122 for Sam Hartman, but he threw 93 deep balls, Sam Hartman did, compared to 61 for CJ Stroud. Now, CJ's completion percentage was a little bit better, but I think we would all agree that he was throwing a little bit better players on that one. But that you kind of look at it and you say, that's a lot of deep balls. That's going to decrease your completion percentage. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at where his completion percentage from 10 to 19, CJ Stroud completed 56% of his passes. Sam Hartman completed 59.8. If you look at throws from 0 to 9, CJ Stroud completed 77.7% of his passes. Sam Hartman was at 77.3. If you look at throws behind the line of scrimmage, Sam Hartman was at 93.8. CJ Stroud was at 92.0. So from 19 under, they were identical, or Sam was slightly better on the 10 to 19 completion percentage. But then if you look at the overall season stats, Vince, Sam Hartman completed, 63.1% of his passes? Right? Isn't that what we said?
Yeah. Yep. 63.1.
CJ Stroud was 66.3. Why? The higher volume and the higher of deep balls. That's what it really comes down to. So in the Notre Dame offense, I think that transitions really well because he's going to do a lot of the intermediate to short stuff. He's going to be really accurate with it. But then the deep stuff, which has been a problem for Notre Dame in the past, he's going to be a lot better at. That's going to take a lot of pressure off the run game. Being able to hit the deep balls. And look, even in the game against South Carolina, once Tyler Buckner hit a couple of those over routes where the linebacker's coming up and he's throwing it right over their head, once he hit a couple of those, showed a willingness to take those deep shots, even though they didn't hit him early, it's going to say, okay, we got to play this team more straight up. And so you started seeing the safeties staying back a little bit more, and then all of a sudden, that's when the run game has got room to go. Because now Logan can get up to the second level and make guys miss. Audrey can get up to the second level and get ahead of steam, where now your safety has no chance if that kid has a head of steam going. And I think those are the things you look at, Vince, and say that's where Notre Dame can and needs to get better. Because if you look at like Drew Pine, he was 51.1% completions this year on throws between 10 and 19. That's pretty low. As I said, CJ Stroud was at like 56, but Sam Hartman was at 59.8 on those throws between 10 and 19. That's a pretty big jump, and that's an area where you need to be a lot better, in my opinion, to protect the run game. It's that balls that go behind the linebackers. Those are the balls where you really need to start having some success this season. It's those throws. And if you can add more of a threat there, look, here's the deal. Sam Hartman this year threw 30 touchdown passes on balls that traveled more than 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. 30 on just that zone. What was Notre Dame's touchdown mark this year as a team? It's 25. As a team, they threw 25 touchdowns. Sam Hartman threw 30 on balls that traveled more than 10 yards past the line of scrimmage alone. And that right there is going to take a lot of pressure off the run game, in my opinion. Yep. If he can translate what he did at Wake in those areas to Notre Dame, that's going to be the key, right? Is doing that. And the other thing he's going to have to do is limit the turnovers. That's going to be another part. But again, if you look at a lot of the tip balls, get hit in the face because he's doing that mesh, taking him near line of scrimmage. I hate that. I hate the mesh. Not as much as the triple option, but I hate the mesh.
I don't know. It's up there,
I hate
though.
the mesh.
It's up there for me. I hate the mesh more than the triple option. So way more.
Yep.
That long.
Yep. God. John A1 says, do you agree with the defensive holding penalty the way it is now? Offensive holding, replay the down versus defensive holding, automatic first down. I do like that.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
No, I do too, because the defensive holding really disrupts what you're trying to do. I mean, way more so than offensive holding. I mean, yes, it disrupts things. That's why they're both penalties. But the defensive holding is different because it's DBs usually, and it disrupts the timing of the offense and all of those different things. Whereas offensive holding is usually linemen. So it's a little bit different. And it's from the spot of the foul and all. So yeah, I have no problem with it.
Well, also the defensive holding is usually in a situation where you've been beat.
Yes.
And you're
if you
trying
didn't
to not
do that, it would be a first down. I mean,
yeah.
The fact that it's only 5 yards, but it also has a first down.
They called defensive holding in the game, I thought, and marched off at 10 yards, I thought.
Really? I thought it was 5.
I thought so too, but then I thought they did it. They might have just said the wrong thing. But yeah, I'm okay with it. The only penalty that here's 2 penalties that to me the punishment is silly. Number 1 is targeting being in an automatic ejection. I think that's ridiculous, especially since they're so inconsistent with like how that USC hit on the Tulane kid is not targeting. Well, he led with his face mask. You still bash that kid's head. Right? Well, but he led with his face. I'm not worried about the defensive player. I'm worried about the offensive player who just got his skull crushed by that hit. That should be targeting to me. I'm sorry. It should be targeting to me. But whatever. It is what it is. So because it's so inconsistent, Bench, you need to get rid of the ejection part of it. Make it like a personal foul. If you get 2 unsportsmanlike conducts, you're ejected. Make it like that.
Yeah.
The other one is offensive pass interference is way too strict of a penalty. So, like, to me, if you commit defensive pass interference at 8 yards down the field, it's a spot foul. It's an 8-yard foul. You're telling me that offensive pass interference is the same penalty as a personal foul? Like, the 15 yards for that is got to go.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's way too harsh of a penalty for me.
For some reason, I thought the NFL was 10. Is that not true?
I don't watch the NFL. So
I don't. Maybe it's not. I just thought offensive pass interference was 10
in college.
yards.
It's 15 yards.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It should be a. You know what they could do is they could make it something where, like, if it's kind of like the defensive pass, if it's within 15 yards, it's a 5-yard penalty.
It's a spot. Okay.
If it's beyond 15, well, because you can't spot penalty in offense but if it's a 5-yard penalty.
Right. I got you.
If it's beyond 15 yards, like you prevent an interception, right? That's a great offensive play, but it's still offensive pass interference. Then it's 10 yards. I mean, you could do something like that, but I think that's 15 yards is way too harsh of a penalty. The reason it's 15 yards in college for pass interference is because it was a 30-yard play that you interfered on. And so you're going to get a maximum thing. Putting a team back 15 yards for an offensive pass interference is just very excessive to me. I don't know if you agree with that, Ben.
No, I agree.
All right, next question from Broke Neck Boy. Here's an interesting one. Can you guys create the best football team of all time in your opinion with the best head coach, defensive coordinator, and OC with a certain type of offense and defense with players that fit your scheme the best?
Good Lord, that's a whole show by itself.
Yeah. I told him to bring another one
to
back
make a
on
roster.
Here, so roster I'm not going to get into, but I'll answer the first part. If I could, like, all time, who would I have? Okay, so again, all time for me is only guys that I've seen play and coach. That's it. It's just guys that I have seen play or coach. My offensive coordinator for me is going to be Steve Spurrier. I always loved his offenses. I'm a big Steve Spurrier guy. So give me Steve Spurrier calling plays in his prime, Vince, and I'm a happy dude. I'm a very happy dude. Defensive coordinator, Kirby Smart. Go Kirby Smart on that one. You got anybody else that you'd like to think about for that one, Vince?
You're so much more dialed into what coaches do.
Yeah.
I'm willing to take your opinion on this. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, and then head coach, it's hard to not go at Nick Saban on that one. I mean, he's done a great job there. I mean, the guy's won 7 national championships, so it's hard for me not to go with him on that one. So there's a little bit of a modern bias here, but honestly, part of that is because when I was younger, like when Nebraska had those great defenses, I couldn't tell you who their defensive coordinator was. I was 15, 16 years old.
Right.
I wasn't locked into that then.
Right.
But like, man, whoever was running their defenses, maybe that's a guy. So I'm going a little bit of recency bias because it wasn't until I was really an adult that I started studying who the coordinators were. And even now, I couldn't tell you who all the coordinators are on all the teams. I just know they're really good on that side of the ball. So that's where I'm going with a little bit on that one, Vince.
Yeah, I like that.
Coleman Smith asks, are all the senior linebackers expected to come back in 2023? As of now, yeah, it's my understanding. It's my understanding. Scott Yerbick asks, with how stocked the running back room will be next season, do you think Chris Tyree will get lost in the mix? And could he be better for him to transfer, not wanting him to transfer? Look, I'm not going to speculate on whether guys will transfer, if I think they should transfer. What I think is that if Chris Tyree comes back next year, and I hope he does, I would hope that the Notre Dame's coaching staff is going to do more to find a role for him.
Yes.
As a runner and receiver.
Biggest regret.
Yes. 21 and 20 personnel needs to be a much bigger part of your offense next year. And Chris Tyree is in the game almost every time you're doing that.
Yeah.
100%. Now, are there things that I would do with him as a receiver? Yes. I've always said that. Would I make him a full-time receiver? No, I wouldn't. But do more where you're getting, and they've done that, getting him screens, do a now screen to him in the bowl game, do things like that. Are there things like that I would do with him? Yes, I would. Would I do that little tunnel screen where remember how Oklahoma State used to do that all the time, where they would have their slot receivers, they'd have like a back out of the backfield, and he would just kind of go downfield and just blast the linebacker, and they would pass it, and they'd bring a receiver over top underneath, and they kind of run like almost like a tunnel screen, but the offensive linemen were getting downfield. It was the receivers and the running back that were getting downfield blocking. I would do stuff like that with Chris Tyree. Just drop that sucker right over the top, and then just let him go. Stuff like that I would do. Now, technically, you're putting him at receiver, but he's not a receiver.
He's not a receiver.
ESPN thought he was a receiver and listen to the broadcast. It's ridiculous. Well, they're using him a lot more like a running back in this game. That's because he is.
He is a running back. Shocker.
Jaden Thomas plays tight end. And it's like, come on, guys. Did you guys do any prep for this game? Like,
no,
seriously.
They just showed up. That's all they did.
Oh, Five Burkhart boys. It really is. Five Burkhart boys. Mailbag. Getting a portal guy like Anthony Lucas would be unbelievable. Unbelievably helpful to show future Notre Dame fits. Taking the easy way is not for you. Look at these fellows who took easy way and regretted it. It would definitely send a big message. Obviously, for those who don't know, Anthony Lucas, who was the top defensive lineman on the board for Notre Dame in 2023. And for a while there, it looked like Notre Dame had a really good chance to get him. He ends up kind of taking the other things of going recruiting and going to Texas A&M, and he's in the portal now. It was regret. I don't know that by the end, if Notre Dame was even number 2 by the end. I think he had it was like Miami and A&M. It's like he was a kid who early on was like the academic aspect of it early on. But once he became a 5-star and had all these other schools, telling him all the other things, his priorities shifted.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens with kids. I had a parent of a big time player this year tell me, yeah, but my kid's a 5-star now. So that changes things. I'm like, it's like one of the worst answers I've ever heard from a parent.
Wrong.
And so it's just one of those things, Vince. So I don't know if what happened to him changes that, or if he just say, I still want the same things, but I'm going to do it somewhere other than A&M because this place is a dumpster fire. I don't know the answer to that. I do know this, that Notre Dame would certainly have very high interest in him if he had interest in them.
You're right.
There's no questioning the Notre Dame.
They're going to reach out.
The question is the Anthony Lucas interest? And that's the part that would surprise me a little bit.
Yeah.
But if they could make it happen, that'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great. And it would send a message like, let's just say Keon Keeley's freshman year doesn't go as planned. Or let's say Keon Keeley has regret in May.
Come on back.
Hey, man.
Come on back.
You can get out of here. You can get out of here in NLI, man. You can get out of that because, look, Anthony Lucas thought the grass is green on the other side too.
Yeah.
And, but right now, if I had to predict, I'd be a little surprised. I'd be a little surprised by that. I would.
We can all hope, though.
Yep. Robert O'Day says, could losing Michael Mayer benefit Tommy Rees? Has to spread the ball around. I'm going to say something, Benson. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this or not. I think there's way too much emphasis on Tommy Rees being the reason Michael Mayer was controlled and it not being a quarterback issue. Because what I saw was several times where the play was designed to go somewhere else and the guy was open and the quarterback just locked in on Michael Mayer. I don't think that was a Tommy Rees thing. I think that was a quarterback thing. And to a degree, I understand it. That's the best tight end in college football. And I'm not sure what I'm seeing, so I'm just going to lock in on that dude. Plenty of times where we saw somebody else was the primary target and the quarterback keyed in on him. So I don't think it was necessarily a benefit. Not having Michael Mayer is never good for you as a coach.
Right.
It's
taking
just
your best
getting your
player off the
quarterback
field is
right.
never
Getting
a
your
good thing.
right. Exactly. I'd rather have more 11
Yes.
personnel and Michael Mayer.
Right.
It's just that's not what your team was this year. So, like, if you could have given me what the offense we saw on Saturday with Michael or on Friday with Michael Mayer at tight end, who's stopping that? Nobody. It's just then, but also use Jaden Thomas on those routes more,
Right.
And things
And
like
that's
that. And at times we did. But the quarterback didn't
that's
look
the
at him.
difference. Now, I think it benefited Tyler Buckner to not have Michael Mayer
Forced
to a
him.
degree because it
Forced
forced
him
him
to
to
do
do
that,
other
yeah.
things. I get that. But again, I will take Michael Mayer on the field all day long. All day long. You can't take your best player off and say it's good for the team.
Agree.
It just, it's just
Agree.
that's not good.
Here's a question I've been back and forth on, Vince. Would you take CJ Williams as a transfer after him decommitting?
Not blindly. I mean, not blindly. There would have to be a conversation. I mean,
very, very long conversation.
Yeah, there would just have to be a conversation. So it wouldn't be hey, I heard you're in the transfer portal, come on back. It would be, hey, if you have any interest in Notre Dame, we need to have a discussion before we even entertain that as a possibility. And that, that's not being petty. That's just looking out for your locker room and the team and all of those things. Look, the kid's got talent. There's no doubt about it. You could use his talent. I'm not saying that. But the manner in which the decommitment happened is something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
That's what
You're talking about,
I want to stay
closer to home and all that. Yeah.
You know more about it than I do, but from my angle, there needs to be a discussion.
For me personally, I would not recruit CJ Williams to come to Notre Dame. I would, however, be open to bringing him in if he pursued us. Because it's kind of like, okay, you made it very clear staying out west was important to you. Staying in LA was important to you. So now I'm going to recruit you and bring you here. But what if you're not playing for us a bunch next year? Are you going to get mad again and want to go back closer to home? Okay, well, you can't sit out a year after that because you can only do that one-time thing. But are you going to be happy? I mean, you made it very clear that you didn't want to be here and you want to stay closer to home. You made that very clear last year.
Right.
We felt as a staff that, you had gone and got the visit and everything went good and you said you wanted to be here and then you bailed. Okay, cool. Is what it is. But for me to want you back, I got to know that you realize that you made the mistake, that you went for the glitz and the glamour and decided to sign with a coach who didn't even offer you a freaking scholarship when he was at Oklahoma, right? So shocker that he wasn't making you a priority at USC. Yeah. I really believe, and I know others have said this, and I really believe this. I think that he went after CJ Williams to create the modern day pipeline and prevent Notre Dame from getting into modern day. That's why I think he went after. I don't think he had any intention of ever building his offense around CJ Williams. But CJ fell for it. Well, that's on you, right? That's on you, and that's on you and your family. You guys fell for that. So that's cool. You want to transfer now? You need to pursue me. And if you pursue me, then I'll be open to it. Yeah. And it's not about pettiness. It's about I've got to know that we're not going to be left at the altar again. Mm-hmm. Like, let's say hypothetically that Peyton Bowen jumped in the portal after year one and wanted to come back. Hey, look, man, I'm not spending a second recruiting you. Here's the steps. If you want to be at Notre Dame, here's the steps you need to do. It's up to you. I'm not going to come visit you. I'm not going to talk to you. We've already said everything we need to say. You know everything you need to know about Notre Dame. If you want to be here, here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Because I'm not getting left at the altar again. If you want to be here, great. Here's the paperwork. Sign it. But if not, I'm not wasting any time doing that again. Because you do all this work and then all of a sudden, let's say hypothetically that Notre Dame reaches out to CJ Williams. They like him and they hear some good things. They're doing all this kind of stuff. Right now, UCLA is not really ready to move on him yet. They're not really super interested. And Oregon's not really super interested in him just yet. And you go through all this process of you think you're going to get him, and then 2 days before he's about to sign and the semester's about to start, UCLA calls, hey, we missed on the kid we wanted.
Right.
Now, look, we love you. We want you. Oregon misses on 2 guys that they want. Hey, here's a little NIL offer. Come play at Nike. What do you think he's going to do? I'm worried that right now, based on his history, that he's going to take that offer last second. Same thing with Peyton Bowen, right? Now, if Keon Keeley jumped in the portal, a little different story. Not because of the player he is, but because of why he went to Alabama. He realizes okay, I think this is truly better for me. It was a whole different deal. He told me up front. He was always straight. It was very honest. It was very upfront, very professional, all that kind of stuff. These other kids, it's not the case, Vince, to me.
Right.
So you got to show me that you want to be here, right? Because I need to know you guys want me. We did that for a whole freaking year last year, right? What can we possibly tell you about Notre Dame that you didn't already know? That we didn't sit there and tell you in your home when you told us you were still going to come. So do you want to be here or not? That's up to you. That's how I would handle it with kids like that.
Yeah.
The kids that were there, that decommitted, that maybe you didn't always feel were always as upfront as you wish they would be. That's what I would do. And because I don't want to set a precedent that if you make a decision and it doesn't work out for you, you can just come running back to us. We'll be your sloppy seconds.
Right. Exactly.
I don't want to set that precedent. Now, are there times that I'll do that? Yes, there will be times, but not for kids who flipped last second. You're going to have to show me a lot more, Vince. Is that petty?
It's not petty.
But
it's protecting what you're building, in my opinion. There's something to be said about guys who want to come to Notre Dame and they sign on the dotted line. They are loyal throughout, right? There's something to be said for that group of guys. And you are building something at Notre Dame. You are trying to create a foundation for what you visualize as what Notre Dame is going to be as a head coach, right? Some of these guys, and CJ Williams falls in that category, just kind of ignored that, almost spit on it, and turned the other direction with the way he handled it. And I like the fact that you brought up Keon Keeley because he handled it the correct way.
Right.
This was not handled the correct way. Peyton Bowen, not handled the correct way. Like
Anthony Lucas, he didn't tell you he was coming and then change his mind.
Right, exactly.
You lost him. That's a different deal than a kid that was committed to you and flipped at the last second.
So no, it's not petty in any way, shape, or form. You are protecting, as a head coach, you are protecting what you are building, and you need to make sure that whoever you bring in is going to be a part of what you are building. And if they are going to be contrary to that, regardless of the talent on the field, you have to make sure that that is protected, because that is your number one job as the head coach.
Right. And 10-Day says the same thing. Like you have to let him reach out first. Now, I think CJ's a good kid. I do. I think CJ's a good football player. I think that they've kind of out-recruited him in a couple positions with the guys they have, but I still think he's a good football player. So if he reached out to me and did the legwork to truly show me he wanted to be here,
that's key.
You're not going to take any other visits. If you want to be here, you're going to do it, and you're going to do it quickly.
Right.
No hemming and hawing. You want to be here. You've visited here how many times? You know everything that there is to know. You either want to be here or you don't. Make a decision right now. You've reached out to us. Make a decision right now. I'd take him back. This isn't about whether I would or wouldn't take him back. I'd take Peyton Bowen back, but the circumstances would have to be different. Yep. It's not pursuing you anymore. You got to pursue us. That's, again, it's not the same thing for every kid you didn't get. It's for those kids that committed to you, were committed for a long time and flipped. This thing, CJ Williams was not committed as long as Peyton Bowen, but he committed over the summer and then flipped right before signing day. It's a different deal. Same with if Devin Moore wanted to transfer to Notre Dame. Same deal. Mm-hmm. Hey, man, I'm not playing this game again. We had you committed for a while, and you flipped. It's a different deal than a kid that I just flat out lost.
Correct.
Very different. So some people may not agree with that, but for me,
that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. And as Jay Henry asked, would CJ have a similar skill set to Jaden Greathouse, though? Yeah, very much so. But I think both of them have enough flexibility that they can play together.
Yeah.
CJ's more of a slot to me in this offense, slot X guy, slot first. I think Jaden could be that as well, but Jaden could also play outside. But yes, that's another thing too. Jaden Greathouse is a bigger, better version of CJ Williams, in my opinion. So, yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. All right, so a few more, Vince. We're getting close to the end of the road here. 99 props BK1. How much is D-line recruiting impacted by Al Golden not helping out? My assumption compared to the offense where Tommy seems to be assisting on every recruit, the team approach seems to win out. 99 props BK1 spent the entire chat like defending Al Washington's recruiting. and I get it, man. I do. I'm not ripping you at all. But the reality is sometimes you got to be able to say this just wasn't good enough. You look at D-line recruiting, somebody says, well, they had a top 10 defensive line class. Brendan Vernon was already in the class when he got hired. Point number one. Number two, Armel Mukum was the guy that Chad Bowden went out and found, not Al Washington. Number three, when this staff got hired, everything good over there, Vince? Okay. When Al Washington got hired, they led for Devin Houston already. So it's just don't screw it up.
Right.
And then Boubacar Traore, you've got a Catholic school kid from Massachusetts who was committed to Boston College. I'm sorry, that's a really good pickup, but that's not like this phenomenal recruiting battle that you won. So like, he's not the reason they had a top 10 defensive line class.
Correct.
And that's
he
the
just
thing.
had to hold it. He just had to hold on to it.
You lost Jason Moore. You say, okay, well, there's nothing he could have done about Keon Keeley. Maybe, but there's definitely something you could have done about Jason Moore. You got beat. Braden Fisk, the kid from Western Michigan. That was a big chunk of that was on Al Gold. From what I understand, the NIL offer he got, Vince, was not life-changing. It was not even necessarily a big reason for it. It was a reason, but a lot of it had to do with if Notre Dame could have presented a similar football option for him and relationship with him from a coaching standpoint, he still probably picks Notre Dame, even with the NIL. So it's been loss after loss after loss. And does Al Gold need to be a better recruiter? Yes, 100%. Is he as good of a recruiter as Tommy Rees? Not close. But you've also got Marcus Freeman there helping with some of that.
Right.
This is a D-line problem because you're not having the same problem at corner. You're not having that problem at linebacker. You're having that problem on the defensive line and to a degree at safety, if we're being honest. So for me, Vince, it's like he's got to do a better job. And he didn't have a great year coaching either.
Right. And that's the other piece. That's the other piece of it too, for me. I mean, it's more than just one aspect. If we're talking about Coach Washington, it's multiple aspects. And we've dove into all of them. So yeah. Yeah. JP Buellsfeld says, why was a South Carolina fake punt formation that led to South Carolina touchdown illegal play? So he's talking about this. It was spread out. It's because swinging gate, baby.
Mm-hmm. The thing is, JP, this is a very good question. It doesn't matter where you line up on the field. It just matters how many guys are or are not on the line of scrimmage.
Correct.
And then based on where they line up, depends on who is an eligible receiver or not. So I believe the guy that caught the ball, Vince, was not on the line of scrimmage or was outside. I believe he was not on the line of scrimmage.
He was you have to have slot.
Yeah. You have to have 6 guys on the line of scrimmage.
Right.
There were 6 guys on the line of scrimmage. You can't run a route if there's someone outside of you on the ball.
Correct.
So whoever's on the ball, everyone inside of him that's also on the ball cannot be an eligible receiver. So like if I line up in a 3 receiver set, and this is what happened to Notre Dame against was it Michigan in 2018? I believe they were in a trip set. I have to go back and look. Miles Boykin catches a touchdown pass, but it comes back. Why? Because the tight end ran a route. Because Miles was on the line of scrimmage. He wasn't supposed to be on the line of scrimmage. So he covered up the tight end. So now the tight end is technically considered an offensive lineman. He can't release down the field and throw the ball. So that's kind of what happened. So in that situation, that was not a covered up receiver, and there were 6 guys on the line of scrimmage. So he was an eligible receiver.
Right.
And eligible receiver.
Right.
Excuse me.
So you can have
JP because it's a funky look alignment. It really was.
And offensive coordinators will mess with you when it comes to on and off the line of scrimmage. So there's a team that we always played, Mishawaka, and they were a triple option team, and they would put twins outside, and they would have both of them on the line of scrimmage. Yeah. It was always a check for our defense.
7. Excuse me, it's 7. I said 6. It's 7. 7 guys on the line.
Right. So the inside guy who's covered up by the outside guy is not an eligible receiver. Don't even cover him. Like we would say, not eligible. Don't even cover him. So, but that was a trick where if you were not a good defense and you didn't realize who was who, you waste a defensive player covering that guy. He can't even go out for a pass. It's a waste of your time. So you have to have a minimum of 7 on the line of scrimmage. You can have 10 on the line of scrimmage if you want to, but you can't have more than 4 off the line of scrimmage.
Right. You have to have minimum 7 on the line.
Right. But you can have as many as you want.
Right.
But you have to have a minimum of
only
7.
2 of those guys. If you have 10 guys on the line of scrimmage, only the 2 outside guys can run routes. That's it.
Correct.
Those are the only 2 eligible receivers you have. Nobody else is eligible.
Yep. And the quarterback. I mean, if the receiver like backs up and you throw him the ball back,
but he's not an eligible receiver until that happens.
Right,
until that would happen. Right.
Yep.
All right. Next question from 99 Props became one. Mailbag. What if scenario, if Notre Dame added Ed Orgeron as defensive coordinator and D-line coach and promotes Laurinaitis to linebacker coach, how would you grade the defensive staff, not compared to current one, just in general? That'd be terrible.
Horrible.
Like, okay, let's say Ed Orgeron did not have some of the off-the-field concerns that he had, right? Regarding his extracurricular activities during his time as head coach at LSU. Or let's say he found redemption for those, because I'm all about redemption, right? I still don't want him as defensive coordinator. Has he ever even been a defensive coordinator? I don't know that he's ever been a defensive coordinator. I know he's been a position coach, very good defensive line coach. And honestly, Vince, I'm looking at it now.
Good question. I don't know that he
has never been a defensive coordinator his entire career. He's never been a defensive coordinator. He's been a head coach. Oh, he was a defensive coordinator for 3 years at USC. So let's look at that real quick, because I wonder if he was like co-defensive coordinator. So it says that he was defensive coordinator from 2011 to 2013. Those were not glory years for USC football. Let's just say that
they were terrible.
Right?
That's the stretch after Pete Carroll.
Yeah,
they're not good.
Yeah, they weren't. Their defense was okay-ish, but they gave up over 20 points every time. So I would not want him as defensive coordinator. Now, if he found redemption as a human being, would I be interested in him as defensive line coach? Yes, I would.
Sure.
Because he's a darn good defensive line coach, and he's a heck of a recruiter. Right?
He is a heck of a recruiter.
You can't deny those.
No, he's a heck of a recruiter.
But, that'd be a tough sell for me, Vince, just because of some of the baggage that comes with it. Like, look, you're still a religious institution. And I realize that you don't expect the football coaches to, the swearing. We're not looking for saints, right? I get that. But there comes a point in line where, like, dude, I can't go there. Right. Like Bobby Petrino. He can find all the redemption he wants, and he's a great offensive mind. I'm not hiring him at Notre Dame. I'm sorry. I can't. I just can't. I can't go there, But
he can go to Texas A&M.
Yeah, I know, right? That's kind of why I brought him up, right?
I know. But the other half of this is the Laurinaitis as linebacker coach. Not ready for that. He's never been a position coach. And regardless of what his position was this year, he wasn't a position coach. I don't know if I'm ready to make that call as your first job.
I would, and here's why. Because of who your head coach is. Like, he's going to be there to kind of oversee, to make sure it's going okay. Step in and help with that. Because I think if you know the game to a degree. For me, it would be where I'd be concerned about him, Vince, is, do you understand what's needed and required of you as a recruiter from a volume standpoint?
Sure. There's a lot that goes into being a position coach.
Right. And I think because of who, and when I say because of who the head coach is, Vince, I'm not even just talking about Marcus Freeman as a linebackers coach. I'm talking about someone who's very close friends with James Laurinaitis. As long as Coach Freeman understands, like, dude, you got to pull some of the slack early on to help get him where he needs to be. Because to your point, Vince, I don't just turn him loose. Todd Light was a phenomenal cornerback in college and a really good pro for a long time. And it took some time for him to become a coach. And even then, it was like, did he really like it? Autry Denson, Notre Dame's all-time leading rusher, terrible coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we're being honest. A mediocre coach, terrible recruiter, which made him a bad coach. If you can't recruit in college, then what value do you bring? So there'd have to be a coach, you need to pick up some of that slack until he gets his feet wet. That would be my thing, Vince. But it's an exception to my normal rule, Vince. It's an exception because of the fact of the relationship he does have with Marcus and Coach Freeman's experience coaching that position. That would be my thing. So, but you'd have to have, but see, here's what wouldn't work. I wouldn't bring in Ed Orgeron as the defensive coordinator. So the whole premise, I don't even care about James Laurinaitis. And so who's your defensive coordinator going to be? That would make for, because a lot of defensive coordinators are linebacker coaches, so I'm just not, I'm not sure how I feel about that one. I'm really not sure how I feel about that one. Yeah, that one really. That's a tough one, man. Just because there's attractive things about Ed Orgeron. Really good D-line coach, really good recruiter. He would bring tremendous name recognition, right? Like, wow, you have a
Yeah.
national championship winning guy on your staff coaching your D-line. I don't know if you lose Jason Moore at that point in time, but the off the field stuff, man, I can't. There'd have to be he'd have to show me so clearly that he realizes he made mistakes and there'd have to be something like that. That's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Really tough one for me, Vince. I don't know what your thoughts are on that part of the whole thing.
I echo your thoughts, and I'm all about second chances and redemption and all of those different things. I just don't know that he'd be a great defensive coordinator. I mean, you X that part out of it, the off the field stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't know that he'd be a good defensive coordinator. As a defensive line coach,
yeah. That's my question,
fine.
Vince, is the D-line coach. I mean, the D coordinator, it's nope,
yeah,
not
right.
Nope,
I would be fine with it, to be honest with you. I mean, yes, he's had off the field issues. He is Catholic. I mean, I guess there's that.
Yeah, but I mean, in based on what he says he is.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
that's
do
fair.
you know
That's
what
fair.
he was getting involved in at LSU? Do you know some of the stuff he did at
fair.
Tennessee with Lane Kiffin? You know what I mean? Like, this is not a good guy. He's just not. Now, look, we all make mistakes. If he is realizing that he's not, that those things are inappropriate, sure. But it's
a lot.
It'd be tough, man. It'd be tough but then you're also torn because, man, it really, you'd bring in better players. He can coach. You'd bring in better players. But at what cost, I guess, would be my thing, Vince. Oh boy, that's a tough one. Mm-hmm. That's a really tough one. So that's gonna kind of do it for nope, didn't say that. Didn't say that.
Charles is going to be tweeting all kinds of stuff about you, buddy.
Yeah, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. Give us a 5-star review, pretty please, if you're listening via podcast, one of your podcast apps. Sign up for the CFB Nation channel on podcast apps as well. Also, if you can help us out by listening to our kind of watching some of the videos on our CFB Nation channel, even some of the older ones, help us get those hours up to 4,000 watch hours. We would greatly appreciate it. Of course, check out the main site at irishbreakdown.com. Ryan Roberts is down in Texas right now. He's sending me videos that I can't wait to go watch from the afternoon practice. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Showed me a bunch of clips from Micah Bell today. Micah Bell had a really good practice. So Ryan's got a practice report of the first practice up now. He'll have some interviews up later. And then, of course, tonight he'll record his sort of recap of the practice. He has the recap up from last night on Irish Breakdowns. We'll put it into a story at irishbreakdown.com, but also if you're a YouTube subscriber, you would have seen that on YouTube channel as well. So you can check those out. He'll be doing those every night, Vince, like at around, but we'll probably have them around 8 or 9 o'clock every night, just depending on what time you can get them done. But he'll have those just kind of recapping what he saw from practice. And he's going to have a lot to say about Micah Bell today, because Micah Bell was a dude today in practice. Vince, I'll have to send you a couple of those clips from him in practice today, Ryan, down there. So
I'm going to check that stuff out.
Yeah, no doubt. So check all that out. And of course, Vince, you got to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And as Vince showed on the crawler, 6 o'clock tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk Show. Will you be on tonight, or is this going to be this is your guys' mailbag tonight, right?
Mailbag night, baby.
So Vince you're going to get 2 mailbags this week, man. That's just got to be loving life. So 6 o'clock tonight, Vince and Sean Stiers will have the mailbag. And then tomorrow we'll be back to talk more of Notre Dame football. Vince and I, 1 o'clock tomorrow on the IB Nation on the Irish Breakdown podcast.